You know, I'm a sucker for a conversation that's happened 40 different times and had no progress made in it since then. You know what I do here. You know how useless my brain is in terms of turning off this type of stuff. So Sam and Spilo had a conversation the other day, 6v6 versus 5v5 kind of thing. In my opinion, the most impactful conversation in the history of Overwatch. Guaranteed the devs are going to see it. It's been a blacklisted topic in all dev conversations, but an actual constructed conversation about it is probably the most impactful thing that can happen for like public opinion and the devs' opinions. It's going to cause repercussions for the next like couple of years, guaranteed, like mark my words there. And they're not going to listen to Iron versus Jake. They're going to listen to the first 2 minutes and ignore him because Iron is awful actually making his point. But yeah, I feel like Sam and Spilo are going to be able to actually hash it out in a constructive way. Spilo, in my opinion, in terms of his thoughts on it, is shut up, it doesn't really matter. We're in 5v5, we need to commit to 5v5, and I fully respect that. You aren't implying that Iron isn't a generational talent when it comes to persuasive speech? Changed my world? Yeah, Iron was, we watched most of it. Iron was awful during that. Just basically did everything apart from going "Ree!" when Jake made a point against his. Before that debate, I was a 6v6 believer. After Iron, I was doubting myself. Yeah. The point is that this is really impactful, right? Really impactful in a way that I don't think people understand right now. So I've got a couple of notes before. First off, Spilo gets like literally nothing from this. Spilo loses in any sense of the word. Like, it's a blacklisted topic from Blizzard. He is well thought of by the dev, and the devs don't want to talk about it because there is kind of no winning. There's no winning at all. If they do a trial mode of 6v6, if there's good feedback, they're screwed. There's no way of winning this for the devs. There's no reason to address it. I get why they blacklisted it, but I feel like the proper way to address it would be to just say, you know what, we're not doing it. just address it full on. There's some benefit to 6v6. 5v5 is better. We're not addressing it. Just straight up say it instead of like blacklist it. Make some sort of statement, a page of written statements, and then it would more or less go away. But it's not going away right now because they're quashing the discussion instead of anything else. It's an easy argument to make for anyone that is in favor of it, that the devs don't want to talk about it because it might be an actual thing to do. So yeah, I don't think the devs are helping themselves, and I don't think Spilo is helped by doing it in the same way that I don't think Jake is helped by doing it. And I think this is pretty much the nail in the coffin of anyone saying that anyone's shilling. Obviously, people are more inclined to go with what the devs say. If the devs have blacklisted something, people are inclined to actually just blacklist it themselves, not talk about it. They're not inclined to toe the Blizzard line, but they're inclined to not talk about it in general. So fair dues to Spilo. He doesn't gain that much by doing it. So first off, nothing matters unless Samito is able to convince Spilo that there is a good chance of the format not killing the tank numbers. The only way of arguing this is to start with that tanks were historically neglected in Overwatch 1. Winston Bryan were the only initiators until Ball got introduced. There were so many less tanks than DPS, and supports are unique playstyles, so people wanted to play supports, and that kind of makes sense. The initiators were historically less popular, and maybe that's part of the issue, that there were less tanks and there were less specific initiators. There were kind of only two to play, and there were more off tanks, and more off tanks were more popular. Maybe the role just needed a little bit more love in terms of the amount of heroes from launch. And maybe the fact that we had 14 DPS and 5 tanks kind of was actually the problem, because people play this game in order to play the hero they want, in order to do the fantasy they want, in order to have the variety in playstyle by swapping through different heroes. If you only have 5 players, you have less of a track in order to actually play the tank role for a longer period of time. That's why I turned to DPS and support after a little while, because there wasn't many tanks. It got boring after a while hitting things on Ryan, even if it's really fun. So at the start of the game, there was Ryan, Winston, D.Va Zarya, and Roadhog. And Roadhog was a really bad influence because nobody wanted to play with Roadhog. And Blizzard did a load of things to incentivize DPS players to go play Roadhog, such as priority pass and stuff like that. It was a real bad influence of the game because it always felt bad to play with, and Roadhog was easily fixable. So we have a role with less heroes that has been actively dumpstered by the type of heroes introduced, and then they dumpstered it again with Sigma and Orisa, and that was really boring. So I'm at the point where, is there a reason to believe that the tank role lack of players was to do with the fact that people just didn't want to play tank in a vacuum as an idea? And I think that's a pretty slam dunk argument to make. There's no way to tell. And even when you make that slam dunk argument, to be clear, there's still enough question mark there for Blizzard to ignore it, because you're not arguing that it is, you're arguing that it could be. You have to get over that first hurdle. If you don't get over that first hurdle, you're stuck. And the second one is if we went back to 6v6, the role is a lot better now. There's loads more initiators. There's no reason for people not to play initiators. There's loads more diversity. The tank role is essentially fully fleshed out. The tank role is interesting. You can't argue with certainty without the black box of numbers that Blizzard has. I don't think even with Blizzard's black box of numbers, you can argue with certainty. We know more or less what's in the black box, right, Placid? We know more or less. We know the tank player base was always smaller, and we know the tank player base dropped off a cliff around when Sigma and Orisa were launched. That's pretty cut and dry, I think. And they can't have stats from a scenario that never existed. Engaging Orisa Sig gameplay goes burr. Well, yeah, of course, they completely dumpstered the role. No wonder the tank player base died. There's no reason to believe that if they properly engaged with the role, properly populated the role, made the correct amount of initiators, that we couldn't have had even player bases between the modes. So you go from there, and you have to argue that essentially the 66 experience now would have been fine. One of the arguments is obviously that there's more diversity in terms of the role for a casual audience, in terms of the role being more interesting for a casual audience. You have to argue that 5v5 is less interesting. So I have pretty good arguments for why casual players might want 6v6 more. Basically, the tank players really struggle with 5v5 because there's so much more responsibility on them. There's certainly a much worse tank trade on the front line, which I'm sure middle and high rank players don't like in terms of tanks. In terms of DPS, I think low rank DPS like to do two things. I think they like to be idiots and stand in the open, and I think they like to shoot things. There are more things to shoot in 6v6. I think it's a more engaging thing for them. And obviously in 6v6, tanks get to cleave more and get more happy clicky buttons, more hit markers and kills and stuff like that in their head. And then as supports, you get to heal more people, you get to heal bot, which, let's be honest, people always went into Overwatch to heal bot and not to DPS. The game's morphed into a much more 1v1 focused game in 5v5, and I don't think that's good for the game as a whole. Having more impact to the DPS doesn't matter when it's not fun. And yeah, the counter argument is, as Spilo has said multiple times in the past, DPS is more engaging. The gameplay is more engaging without that off tank in the way of a lane. So essentially you can fight as a DPS on that lane yourself. And that's fair enough. Do you know what? That's an entirely valid perspective. I assume that perspective is had by most of the mid-rank and high-rank, at least DPS players. Most of them. But there's a little counter to that in that the fact that the tanks are so big that if they occupy the lane, you can't exist in the lane regardless. You have to essentially swap lane to get out, and in 6v6, it's more likely that you could duel out the lane against a tank. So you have that like give and take there, and I think that's a bit of a wash. So first off, we had the argument that the tank player base wouldn't be dumpstered. Then we have the argument that the play experience might be better. And then we have the third argument of essentially the design of the game. How the 5v5 game mode doesn't allow extreme designs. It doesn't allow Junkrat, it doesn't allow Roadhog, it doesn't allow like full initiators to be easily designed. It basically shuts off the design space. The more extreme designs from the dev team, even though they're bad as a concept, I think they're bad as a concept, there is a lot less space to design them in 5v5 than 6v6. And the devs are so bad at designing sometimes, especially with characters like Malga, we really have to think about what game mode they're able to design better. If they are struggling to design in 5v5, the more sharp game mode with the more focus on DPS duels and the more focus on fast gameplay, then maybe we should go back to the slower game mode that's a little bit easier and allows more things in the design space. And my answer is tanks are difficult to fix and Blizzard will struggle to fix them. My argument is that the play experience in 5v5 is not fixable without significant reworks. I think those reworks are so significant that it's not worth trying. I think the design space is much bigger in 6v6 and allows Blizzard to make a lot more mistakes without there being issues. And therefore, the cost of the reworks far exceeds the cost of the format changing. So first argument is that the tank player bases can't die. If Sam doesn't make this argument, we lose. Anyone that likes 6v6 loses straight away. The second argument is that the play experience is better. I think that tracks for 6v6. And the third argument is that the design space is smaller. And I think that is the kicker. That's the real kicker. And now I'm going to actually go into it because I wanted to get all of that out the way before getting anywhere near this debate, just to focus us. We need Sam to make a convincing argument that there is a chance, not an assurity, but a chance the tank player base numbers won't drop off the cliff if we go to 6v6. That's the starting. And if we can't get there, we're screwed. So without further ado, we're going to go on 1.25 speed. Luca.
Yo, what's up? Can you hear me all right? Why quick play? Because I'm meeting with Spilo in 10 minutes. I'll be good, guys. It's just, you know, I've had a lot on my plate the last 9 months, and I've tried to grow a lot as a person. It's definitely been a lot of ups and downs, but hasn't quite been the results that I wanted across the board. So it's just a lot. It's all good though. Spilo and I are gonna talk 5v5 and 6v6. We're not approaching this conversation from like the which side are you on. We're approaching this conversation from like just a raw like what's on the table in the middle side. We're not gonna lean any direction. We're just gonna lay shit out there and just kind of see where it goes. All right.
I know you just did a huge rant on this, but I'm still not convinced these conversations even have impact. You can always say that things don't matter because nothing will change until there is such a community uproar that things change. And that's true in everything in life. That's true in literally everything. It's true in marketing. It's true in actual design. It's true in the direction of video games. It's true in things like policy changes. Yeah, it solely truly becomes impossible when people give up on it. Yeah, it's essentially the argument that you can't argue for political change because first off, it's annoying that you're protesting, and second off, it's not going to change anyway, right? It's that the centrist position of, well, what's the point in doing any protesting? It doesn't track. It's never tracked. There is always a chance of everything. Quite frankly, if the community uproar is big enough, Blizzard will listen to it in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, they'd be stupid to. So, yeah, you're annoying me by discussing this is essentially all that people can say. And you know what? Fair enough. It's annoying that this comes up so often to the majority of people. I'm entirely convinced by that. But it doesn't make it invalid or unhelpful to have these discussions. And I think specifically Sam and Spilo are going to have the most productive discussion. For protesting, it's for agencies that have checks and balances and are held accountable through voting. Blizzard is a private corporation. The private corporation are beholden to one thing, and that's profits. Full. One thing is profits. If the profits dip, they're going to look at other options. That's it. Do you think that the profits for Overwatch might be dipping or not increasing as fast as the shareholders want? Yes. 100% yes. The profits, to be clear, are going up. The player base numbers are climbing, as according to the Steam stats, though as to whether people are swapping off a Battle.net to Steam and it might be about stable, it's a little bit hard to tell. They use 5v5 format changes as a justification to monetize more elements of the game. There is no reason why they couldn't rebrand the game to Overwatch without the 2 on it and essentially just like put it back to 6v6. Claim it's a classic revamp of the game, come back to this old game that you loved back in the day. They are not beyond that marketing push. And in fact, the fact that it's such a big news that they'd be changing back would be a reason why they'd be more likely to go for it. So in terms of like the profit motivation, there's a profit motivation in doing anything interesting in your game. It just depends whether they want to or not. But I don't think the conversation's unnecessary, and I don't think the conversation's unhelpful. I think people are right to be annoyed by it, the fact that it's gone on for so long, it's so incessant, and more to the fact that the conversation doesn't tend to improve over time or get anywhere. That, yeah, you can be annoyed by that, but saying it's useless, it's nothing. It's nothing.
So I'm titling this the final 5v5 and 6v6 debate, but we all know that's not going to be the case.
It'll never end.
No, it'll never end. But I want this to be like by far the most productive one.
Yeah, I agree.
I think even with like the SVB group up debate back in the day, like I think it was like a good starting point maybe. But I think a lot of the points in hindsight were like not super accurate. I think that there was a little bit of emotion involved from I love Hawk to death, but, like watching Hawk and Jake yak at each other. And,
it's fun. It's entertaining. It's entertaining.
It was fun, exactly. And then the Jake and Iron debate was like,
I saw a couple moments of that.
The Jake and Iron debate was an absolute mess. The SVB debate was an absolute mess. It was a mess all over for both of them. The Jake and Iron debate did more damage to the 6v6 cause than anything else that could have been there, because he was just a bad advocate in general. I don't think anyone's going to argue against that. It was just a bad advocate.
I was like, the reason why I'm glad I get to have this with you is because I think that you are the only person who, because I kind of started out like with your approach too, where I was pretty indifferent, and then I started thinking about this, but I think you're the only person that I've seen that's come up with that either one is not wrong about how things worked in Overwatch 1, or 2 has actually proposed like legitimate, like, okay, create counterplay by doing this and allow an option. Right. Like you're the only person.
Spilo's idea of counterplay, to be clear, before we start, is that every single tank needs a button that essentially is a 1 second skillful counterplay kind of blight thing. My interpretation of what he said is every single tank needs a 1 second immunity to status effects and damage in their kit in some way, shape, or form. That is skillful enough that it can act as a sort of parry thing, where you can essentially just counter something if you have skillful counterplay to it. And that's what he said. Tanks need skillful counterplay in their mitigation. Things like Fortify are terrible. Things like Ramatra block are terrible. That's Spilo's idea.
Person I've seen that's legitimately had that conversation that is not, all right, let's give Hog Super Vape and Pigpen.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Ball, whatever it may be. So this should be a fun one. I'm excited. I think the tone of it's going to be very different from.
Well, I think it has to be productive. It's like I think that it has to be productive at some point. So that's where it comes down to people are defending 6v6 for the sake of defending 6v6 and vice versa. And so because of that, we start having a lot of unintentional bad faith arguments because they're so torn up with defending 5v5, they fail to see the blatantly obvious objective issues with 5v5. So.
And vice versa too. There's people don't realize. I've seen some of the worst 6v6 tanks. One of the ones I can't stand is, and I think you'll agree with this, is splitting the tank queue for an off tank and a main tank.
It makes no sense whatsoever. First off, Blizzard and the player base have no fucking idea what an off tank and a main tank is, so it will never work because they actually aren't educated enough to know the difference in the design. And second off, numbers don't check out.
Most frustrating ones to me. It's just that would never work. That would never work.
Right. And I've got a list of myths. In fact, that's one of the first things I want to do with you is go through a couple of myth busters.
All right, let's do it.
If people want to play Bull/Winton, let them. Yeah, the thing is, if the game is well designed, double main tank and double off tank should not be oppressive. The canary in the coal mine is when they are oppressive. If Bull Winston is oppressive, you designed the game in a bad way. If Rhine Ramatra is more oppressive than Rhine Diva or Ramatra Diva, then you've got real problems in your game, so there's no reason to limit the queues. Now, the one exception to this, I'd say the one exception throughout the history of Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2 is Roadhog, because Roadhog is a fundamentally poor character in the fact that he essentially has only hard pressure. There's no soft pressure in his kit. The hook on a 6-second cooldown threatens a kill, and that's not what tanks do. Tanks pressure in a soft way so they can move people around. DPS pressure in a hard way so they have more risk of a death happening when they move people around. Roadhog is fundamentally flawed and caused a load of problems in the game historically and today and in the future if we ever went back to 6v6.
But first off here, I'm gonna introduce it. The reason why we're doing this, let's be honest, is tank. I think the problem with tank is it's as useful as a meat shield in an MMO a lot of times, which means that you are very useful, but it just the gameplay loop is so boring to do that. And most people don't want that. Nobody wants to be the sponge. And also, I think we have to talk a little bit about support as well. And I think that you're the bat brig, right? You're the bat brig guy.
I think DPS as well. As I said at the start, every single role is dumpstered by the 5v5 format. I think that the casual player does not want to do the things that the 5v5 format makes them have to do. I don't think DPS players want to win duels. I think DPS players, especially from bronze to diamond, want to be able to shoot things. That's all they want to do, and that's why they shoot the tanks. Because it feels good. They want the feedback. They want to be in the system. They want that clicky, and then the logo comes up for a kill, and they're like, yeah, I did something. They don't want to have to do the hard DPS. Nobody likes fighting a Genji. It's not fun. Nobody enjoys doing it. So why are we forcing the DPS role and the support role to always be doing the theoretical equivalent of fighting a Genji?
And that's actually a really good point, because one of the fundamentals of first-person shooters is taking space, taking off angles, making plays. And when you have support specifically designed around AoE sustain, brainless AoE sustain, it breaks the game. It's not just the second tank, the third tank that breaks the game. It's also the AoE sustain. And we've even seen that back during the alpha when Junker Queen Shout was initially released. And during scrims, you actually didn't have to take off angles at all. People were trying to counterpick Junker Queen, these fire comps, and you just get on point and shout. And it was like GOATS 2.0. So it's it doesn't.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If you stack up things that imply that you should stack up on a team comp, eventually it hits the point you have to stack up. That just is what it is. It ruins the game, and that's what happened at the end of 6v6. It's very simple.
It doesn't matter whether it's the tank. It doesn't matter if it's the support.
It's the concept.
It's a concept of not needing to take productivity. So. I'm not really a 5v5. So for those of you in your crew, I'm not a 5v5 or 6v6 advocate. I would have described myself as more of a 5v5 advocate in the months back, but even then I still saw 5v5 as having major flaws. I think I'm more in between now.
I think you're a straight shooter. You're a straight shooter.
I try to be. I definitely have my.
I've totally convinced him. That's the thing. He's watched my videos. He's been totally convinced by me. That's the reason why I am the cause of this. I blame me.
It's impossible not to, but I try to at least be aware that I've coached at the highest levels. I've coached in Overwatch League for several years, coaching contenders for even longer than that. And also, I think the key thing is I've coached and played in bronze, for a long time. Like I started. This is my first-person shooter. I started in bronze, so I try to have both sides of the thing. And I've done a lot of extensive study into like human psychology and how it impacts this stuff. So I think tanks is the crux of the issue. I define tank as an attention baiter, loud, threatening, utilize the psychology of proximity. That's why a lot of tanks are.
No, that's not how tanks work. That's the problem with Spilo. How can the most intelligent person in the game space of Overwatch, the most clear-thinking person, actually be wrong on this? The only difference, apart from tanks having bigger health pools, that are universal across the tank player base, is the fact that the tanks apply softer pressure apart from Roadhog. It's that difference, right? You have a Widowmaker versus you have a Sigma. Widowmaker's at range, Sigma's at range. Widowmaker, if they're taking a duel with someone, gets a kill or doesn't get a kill. Sigma forces the other person to leave. That's the only difference. It is soft pressure, which implies space control instead of kills. If you have hard pressure like Roadhog, it's a badly designed character. That's why I have a lot of problems with Roadhog. And people never say this, but this is the only actual difference between a tank and a DPS. And yes, certain types of close range, high pressure cycles lead to more space control. Because if you have a really good pressure cycle at close range, it can be backed up by certain resources, and that can be really good at space control. Generally, the idea of being able to stay in an area, like Spilo said before, and control space and stay in that space is an aspect, but there's no necessity of any of this apart from the ability to apply soft pressure. That's the only, universal thing that tanks have.
Or, getting in your face close range tanks. So what happens is people overreact and overfocus that threat. One of the great examples is a Winston dives you in front of his Widowmaker sightlines. Sometimes it's actually not the Winston that's the threat, it's the Widowmaker, but everyone's going to focus the Winston. So what ends up happening is that everyone focuses the tank, and that's not a 5v5 issue. That's a 66 and 5v5 issue.
That's a global tank. That's what tanks
It's a global
are.
tank issue. But the benefit of 66 is that it had two tanks to split up that loud and in-your-face focus. Either something that enables that tank or something that also got in your face. It doesn't matter if you're running Roadhog. That's two big, loud targets, right, that are going to be in your face. And so the 5v5 solution, at its fundamental thing, has to be something about making the tanks less obviously imposing and threatening, or opening more skillful counterplay options, but it hasn't done so. So last thing I'll say here is, regardless of whatever we think, the low-hanging fruit of counter-swapping tank with noob characters has to be addressed. I think hero design is at the root cause of a lot of things, and that's something that I think you and I
think the simple fact is that Blizzard cannot do this well enough to really make the game good in this format, because it's actually just harder in this format. I think that's the core of it. I don't think there's anything more to discuss in terms of that. There's a load of ways to think about how you can design 5v5 properly with tanks that have skillful counterplay. I don't think anyone really thinks that Blizzard can do this in a reasonable manner, in a reasonable timescale before the tank player base drops off a cliff. I don't think they can.
Agree on a lot, whether it's Sombra Hack, Bastion Reaper, Maywall, and
there's low-hanging fruit
Roadhog.
that would easy to chop, that would make the experience better regardless of format.
Exactly.
So, the perma-stealth should have... I've hated that. Zachary and I talked about this way back in the day, too. No one ever really was a big fan of the perma-stealth, and that's an easy low-hanging fruit to get.
Yeah, agreed. Anytime even a Rhine was meta in Overwatch League as well, outside of Goats, it was immediately Maywall, right? Maywall, Mayfreeze, May Blizzard, and stuff like that. It's and I love May as a character in Overwatch too, but there's a lot of difficult things for Overwatch 1 tanks as well. So, okay, so Mythbusters here. Okay.
But that's the thing. May could exist in that current state in 6v6. It wasn't directly horribly problematic. It was bad design. It was always bad design, but it was a possible design space because the format allowed for that wider possible design space.
Okay, I'm gonna start off with a pro 6v6 one. Tank synergy makes 6v6 broken. I'm gonna give my quick bullet points here, and then I want to set you off. Okay, so I think this is a myth. Let me tell you why. So I agree with you. I think it's a balance issue. I've been studying up my Samito VODs. I got my old raggedy notebook here. I've been taking thousands of notes here.
Even I haven't looked at the VODs in a long time, so I'm
yeah. So I think it's a balance issue. I agree with you. I think sustained tanks and low effort synergies were the problem. I think nobody complains about Rhine Zarya. Nobody really complains about Rhine Diva. Nobody really complains about Winston Diva. It's because those synergies required a lot of skill, a lot of crucial timing to get things done well.
Yep. Anything with a localized pressure cycle that is very tight in terms of the timing requires very tight timing for the other person to make it work. So it doesn't really work in low ranks. Rhine Diva was not OP in low ranks in any way, shape, or form. They play it because they thought it was good, but yeah, no. I stopped watching both these guys on Twitch/YouTube because all they do is bitch about the game to the point that seems unreasonable. Man, you're going to hate me.
They had...
People who complained about having tank synergy versus not was an auto lose are silly. But that's another thing. What the player base thinks is actually reality, right? Because that's what people are going to pick around. It's the same as saying counter swapping is a problem. Counter swapping might not be a problem as much as people think, but the fact that people think it makes it an issue because people are going to act like it. And the fact that people acted like not having the synergy was an auto lose was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was all about timing. It was all about your team working together properly. Sure, people not picking the things that worked together was a very good sign that they're not going to work properly together in a general sense. You point out problems, then have solutions that seem fair, but you actually seem to like the game. Oh, I love the game. It's the only reason why I'm here. I think people tend to be a little bit more doomer than they should be in general. I would be doing Marvel Rivals or a different game, or I'd have hung this up entirely and got a full-time job if I didn't actually enjoy the video game. Like, I really have passion. I really want the game to improve. The sad part is I think the game is going in the wrong direction. I need to argue it like strongly, otherwise I've got an issue. Make it so tanks can't swap once a game starts, but DPS can, and then take away the 20% healing buff. That never work though, would it? Because then you have to rely on Blizzard being able to perfectly balance the tanks to not be worse against the other. You can imagine you roll out on Winston, they roll out on Roadhog. The Winston player would leave the game half the time. That is horrific.
A lot of windows of vulnerability.
Yeah, DPS able to counter swap, but the tanks can't. It would be a problem
as well. Like, Zarya has a long cooldown. D.Va Matrix only has so much Matrix plus the HP to play around. Bubble breaks and then Winston's vulnerable, right? The problem with double shield is because that there was, outside of like Orisa shield, which had a relatively low cooldown when you could cycle fortify, there was not windows of vulnerability, right? And I think that's the key thing when we're talking about double tank shield.
Yes, I like, it's a very easy thing, right? This is to do with the way that resources actually work in the video game, which for some reason nobody else but me is actually able to talk about clearly. I've never heard anyone talk about resources, right? If you have a resource that applies for a short period of time, it has to be bigger than the other resource that applies for a longer period of time, which has to be smaller. Very simple. So the bigger resource is going to be used in the short period of time at the time that is most impactful, called there, right when they're doing something, the Winston or Reinhardt is swinging, which means you need very good timing in order to make it work. That's the fundamentals. Initiators have short-range pressure cycles that have a very specific timing that you use the bursty resources on to make it better, because that's the best way to use the bursty resources. Apart from, obviously, you can use that to peel. If you have no way to use the bursty resources aggressively on an initiator, all that people do is peel. So if you have these long-term resources that are as good as or cycle fast as the rest of them, even though they're soft, the shield, the Sigma shield, the Orisa shield, and you can just time them together, your problem isn't the resources, your problem isn't the concept, your problem is the balancing, and the balancing is screwed. Love how chaotic Spilo looks. Just Spilo's hair is amazing. I know. I think
also, here's another thing I was thinking of. All right, why do we give tank synergy such a hard time, but support synergies just get a free pass?
Yes, and that's a big point that Iron made too, that I really agree with him on. I don't know why that happened. I think that a lot of it was just kind of going, well here's why. The reason why is what you said. It's because the tanks are the forefront. And I always hated this when everybody talked about it. Really is our fault as a community. We talked. I hope you saw my VOD from 2019 where I was like, this patch does not solve double shield. I pulled it up from 2019 where I was like, look, this is back when I was a lot more close with Blizzard and stuff like that, where I literally said, this won't solve it. It's the sustain behind it. The barriers are what's in your face. You think that's the
no, it's not just the sustain, right? Because what we're doing is we're stacking up these long-term resources with these short bursty resources like Lamp that had no way to use them aggressively or weren't designed to use them aggressively. So what we had is we had a shield that lasts forever, and we had specific bursts if they ever pushed into us. So we were completely stable. Ultimate stability should never be attainable. Is that a hard concept, guys? Is that really that difficult? Or it should at least be hard to do. It was a horrible design, and yeah, of course it screwed the game.
Problem, but it's when you go behind them and the Sigma and Orisa can out-sustain Reinhardt in a close-range melee brawl.
It's crazy.
Exactly.
So yeah, I agree with you on that. I think Bap and Briggs syncing up, especially like AoE healing abilities in general. Like Inspire, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Inspire is probably a big reason why the Jotes comp worked as well as it did, even after all of that, right? Like obviously
partly true. I think with Inspire, with Brig, it was partly because the other supports just got run down, basically, with double shot and Lucio stack. It's like people tried Ana, people tried Zen, people even tried Moira, but her utility is just terrible, right? So it's like Brig was the character that with Bash could disengage the Junker Queen shot, whereas other supports just couldn't do it as easily. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly, and that's why we have Brig here, because I think Brig wasn't the only perpetrator of this, but she was really the first one who was allowed to cheat the game, cheat the system. You don't have to take off angles, you don't have to take productivity. You can sit in one spot, deny those off angles, heck, you can pocket off angles with the armor packs.
And it overhealed too back then too. Like,
and it would overheal. Yeah, that was crazy. Broken. I remember the Raspberry Racers comp, the Pharah with 225 HP.
Oh my god, I forgot about that. Jesus. You did do your homework, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I scrimmed with those guys all the time. It was obnoxious. Tracer with extra 25 HP. But yeah, I mean, it was basically just like you have this meta where like you have these characters that can just deny
literally everything. Brig was OP at literally everything apart from 3-bit heals. It was crazy. And even like the fact that you could just stack some AoE healing 3 times and make it so that you had the same map. Like you go Lucio Brig and have 30 healing per second. It means you basically need no other healing in the comp. It was crazy, especially when like Anna at that point was doing 82 healing per second. It was just stupid.
Everything in this spot. And then you have Bap who does the exact same thing. Right now he has the ranged weapon, but his regenerative burst, his lamp. There's just so many things. Even his AoE heal, right? Like just consistent AoE sustain. You good on your end?
Yeah, my Discord just bugged out. We're good now. Okay, that was my for whatever reason my Discord randomly goes black sometimes. I don't know why that is.
Oh, that's weird.
That's weird. Go ahead. Yeah, go
ahead. This is not group up as well. But yeah, I think that like a lot of support synergies, especially stuff that's AoE sustain. I was kind of thinking about this because one of my old arguments was that Winston tank synergies can still be broken because even Winston D.Va have had their sustain metas in the pro leagues at times. But I actually was wrong with that. All right, because I remember the support duo that allowed Winston D.Va to quote-unquote cheat map control and basically play like a brawl comp. I don't know if you remember this. It was Moira Lucio. Yeah. It was Moira Lucio.
Crazy.
And that composition never would have worked. I mean, it would have worked, but it wouldn't have played in the way that it did.
Right, with Lucio on it.
Moira has too much healing for AoE heals. Moira shouldn't be at like 85 healing per second. Moira should be at like 75. And there really would be no problem with Moira. And then you should reduce the ult charge total in order to account for that. Moira's just actually OP in the one thing she does because she's fully focused on that one thing. And it causes just degenerate stuff.
It would have been more like a normal dive comp if it had not been Moira. And so that's even within the more healthy tank designs, a character like Moira can break the game. And I think that's something we'll come at too. So, okay, that's what I'm coming directly at you now.
Sure.
All right. 5v5 limits DPS support options because you're not able to focus the tank down as easily because the tank is not as much of a kill threat. My opinion is I think more space is more options. I think that if there was one fewer tank, you do have more positional choices with DPS and support. We'll talk about why that is in a little bit. And I've been coaching a lot of Overwatch too, right? So in general, there's a little bit more proactivity demanded. I think that is fixable with 6v6 if you made healing less of a responsibility for supports, if you dealt with some of the sustain of the double shield stacking.
And then my counter to this from Spilo is that I don't think the majority of players necessarily want more positional ability. I don't think they want to be able to have literally every place on the map open to them. I think they want to be able to generally stand in the open, do healing and do TPS. I think this is the middle and high ranks problem. And this is what middle and high ranked players tend to want. I don't think bronze players think about I can't stand over there because I'm going to get killed and that's oppressive. I think they think, I've stood slightly off from my tank and got murdered instantly because I was in the open. That's oppressive.
But or maybe even the maps, right? How choke oriented a lot of the maps are. I don't know how much we talked about this with Marvel Rivals, but more broad maps, it didn't even feel like 6v6. It felt like there's a lot of space to do stuff. But I do think that was a problem with 6v6 at times.
So here's why I think that I would say that 6v6 has more options. You're right, the space is easier to access, 100%. But what that does is it doesn't give you an extra option, in my opinion. I think it allows you to get up the chain of, I need to access the duel that's there. So what I will give you is that it absolutely is easier to access space to take the duels themselves. But in terms of actual targets on the map that were killable, there were more options and entry, obviously because there's one more player, but more specifically because both of those tanks were lower health. And forget Season 9. Let's go pre-Season 9. Well, I don't even know if we should go pre-Season 9 at this point because, again, the game's a little bit different. But at least pre-Season 9 where I really, really was arguing that. Because I feel like it's a little bit bad faith argument for me to say, now everything has more health, so the duels are harder when the DPS passive is in the game. So that's just a general gameplay change. That's not a format thing. I when support abilities were all weaker, so you have an easier time dueling those supports in the back, and both tanks were splittable and killable in each fight. Now, those kills were worth less, but in terms of the actual choices and gameplay options I had more options to open up the engage. Now, it wasn't worth as much, and I will give you that. I will give 5v5 that, because by the numbers, again, 1 kill in 5v5 is worth way more, and the fights in general are less turnable because of that. But I liked the option of not going up against incredible, BAP shift is way stronger in this game. Brig Bash is weaker. It got its damage, but the stun.
Yeah, so Sam's actually entirely there. The idea was you have 3 lanes in a game of Overwatch. In general, obviously there could be more than 3 lanes based on high ground. There's generally 3 lanes. At least there's 2. And if one lane is occupied by a tank, that's a full block to the lane in 5v5. But it wasn't a block to the lane in 6v6. What it was is a small block that can be reinforcing something else. So you, instead of having this blocked and a DPS duel over here, right? So you have this one DPS duel and you have this lane blocked, and you cannot make a hero that is really good at clearing this lane. So essentially you're forced to only go out here or to shoot other people behind the tank down the middle lane. What we had in 6v6 was we had, instead of having a block, we had something here that you could hate on, something here that you could hate on, and you could have characters like Reaper that could actually were better at moving the enemy tank out of these wide lanes, and we had characters like Junkrat that were like more suited to be able to moving things out of this wide lane. So now if we have Junkrat has no ability to duel in the offline because there's never going to be a tank there, so there's always going to be DPS there against Junkrat, and down main he can't be good enough to actually have a significant impact into the tank, because then you can just stack up things that hate the tank and murder the tank down main.
Stun was way more of a threat. I think we'll both agree on that one, that the stun was just a much bigger threat, just so much easier to access and deny a duel. I will give you this. I think the duel is easier to get, like, you skip one step of maybe like a little bit of a poke phase to go directly take that duel, but I like the options you have, and with both tanks having less health, which is something that everyone grilled Avril for that take, where he said that he thinks tanks should be more like DPS, and that's something I wanted to ask you about a little bit later today. I think it's a mistake to have the tanks be higher health. I'd love to see how it would feel when, because they don't. Well, we'll get to that. I don't want to go off.
We'll get to that. But you're right. That is one of the proposed solutions. Yeah, I guess it's more about like the order of operations here, because you're right. Like you have both tanks. You take the tank trade. You're allowed to create space because you're actually able to threaten those tanks in Overwatch 1, and then you're able to choose your engagements. Whereas Overwatch 2 and 5v5, you're allowed to immediately choose your angle from the get-go. So that's kind of like that is.
But you have that one block in the one lane. So some of the maps like King's Row are linear, therefore you can't get around the tank trade. Whereas in 6v6, it was more like there was like two small components that you could hate on individually, because that was a bit more healthy in the format.
I also think that that's something that could be balanced out as well. Like I think, like we think about like all the 2 CP chokes, right? Like you don't get to choose your targets, and sometimes you don't get to choose your targets for a long time. But how much of that is a map design issue, right? And I think that's one of the things we got to make sure when we're making these arguments, they're not in bad faith, and we're factoring in all the variables.
Absolutely.
You know, people always talk about like what would 2CP be like with 5v5, and that is, I'm not a huge 2CP fan, but I do think that is an interesting question. That is an interesting question with more space.
Because you have one less person to stall too, right? It's one less person to stall.
I think 2CP still has exactly the same problems it had in 6v6. 2CP was made on the format of a team can full hold main, and it requires ultimates or coordination in order to take main away from the team that is defending, right? It's made on a defensive advantage. And I think that always was questionable design space. I think in 5v5, it's bad design space because the whole game's been made to not have the defensive advantage be ridiculous.
Exactly. You probably could have more angles open up with like no double tank gutting those chokes, right? With like, you'd always have like Anubis, you'd set the diva up, height, she drops, sig. Like I remember the double shield rotations on Anubis were brutal. But that's a little bit, it's a lot of things contributing to that.
Right, exactly.
So here's what I'll say on that, Mythbust, to wrap it up. I think I'm willing to go 50-50 on that. I acknowledge 100% 5v5. The order of operations to go up like and directly take the duel is there's one less step. Those duels themselves are now harder because the abilities are actually stronger. And let's not count Season 9, forget Season 9, like the support abilities are better. But in 6v6, I still stand by that. I actually had more options to get the engagement because both tanks were actually killable. And you will almost never see a solo tank die at the very, very beginning of the fight. Usually it's a duel on the side, but it does happen. So I'll go 50-50 on that with you.
Okay, good. Tank stack is why we had goats. Next myth. Okay. Partly true, because whenever there's a lot of supports, that usually means there's a lot of tanks. But you've made this point before with Slambulance Squad Tank. It's only when the supports are unable to enable that level of HP. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So you're right, the support stacking, especially the AoE sustain we talked about, is what enabled comps to cheat map control, breaking the fundamentals of first-person shooters. And this is
one of the main problems for the ability to tank stack. It was the ability to stack bursty resources like Bubble and DM from the tanks that just made it really scary. And yeah, it was AoE support, of course. Like there was a lot of components there, but I mean, I do think there were problems in the format of stacking this like bursty resource because it's this double-edged sword, right? You put a bursty resource in a game, it can be used to reinforce a pressure cycle, or it can be used to completely cancel out a pressure cycle. So what we did was we made a type of comp that has enough sustain to generally exist and run to point, and have two bursty resources to cancel out any pressure cycles into you if you want to pressure into it. It won't against any of the general poke comps and stuff like that.
Brig BAP is broken. Denies closing distance, AoE sustain, same with our queen shot. We talked about this. It's one example of why hero design matters and not just the format.
Yes.
Right? Because whether it's 2-2-2 or 3-3, BAP Brig, Zen Lucio, Moira Lucio Brig, like those characters are going to cause issues when AoE sustain causes a problem. And I think that like it's tanks were again, like you said, the obvious problem of Ghostbusters. Hey, look at me, tank, you know. But they weren't the real problem. And you could definitely say it was really funny because you remember those days when they kept buffing Reaper Moira or Reaper May. They're the tank busters, guys. So surely they'll.
And you remember what that did to Plat. You remember what that did to Reaper and Plat. And even in ranked sometimes too, I would have.
Tank busters can't bust a coordinated tank duo. They can bust one tank on an angle. So do you know the weird thing here? But like buffing tank busters, didn't make goats worse. It made playing normally around goats worse. Because in an abstract concept in ladder, all it did was make the individual matchups against, let's say, a Zarya and a Reaper worse, and a Zarya and a Hanzo worse, so you'd never split off from main. What you did instead, you stack up and exist in all of your bursty resources. It did literally the opposite of what it was meant to do, buffing DPS to bust the tank so that Ghost went away. It did the opposite, because Blizzard didn't have any idea how to balance their game.
One game where I had like 95% kill to participation on Reaper with the Fran, and I had like 50%, was it 50%? Yep. It was 50% lifesteal. So Reaper's hard meta and plat, and this is why I come back and say, I was like, look, like they never really understood what caused goats, because if they had done that, it's an easy fix. And as the Brig player, you know, I'm curious what you'll think about this before we move on to the next one. They should have made Inspire stationary when it activated. So like at least the team had to clump up and they couldn't just completely cheat the space, but they tried to do, and this is why it's such a tricky ability, why I always complain about.
No, they should have just reduced it to 11 healing per second. It was still good. They should just reduce it.
Brig so much. Even now in my Brig guide, in this game really shows it too. It's like my most viewed guide. It's all about proccing Inspire. Nobody knows what Inspire actually does because you don't see it. But once you understand, I have so much.
Inspire is just ridiculous for how unreadable it is in the game. It is crazy. Like, I'd say a good 2/3 of the people that put a Brig VOD in have no fucking idea how the character works. It's crazy. Like, how is this possible? How are they so good at designing the game in terms of readability, and yet nobody knows what the game does?
Many comments on that video, got like 200-something K views. Holy shit, this character has like come to life in a whole new way. I climbed 5 ranks doing it. Brig is the easiest character to access once you just understand what Inspire does, and it's so easy to pick up. Like in 1 week of playing Brig. Now, obviously, like at the contenders level, I fed for about 2 or 3, and that was fucking brutal. I remember chicken contendies would just run us over one block, and I'd be like, oh, that's fucking it. Like, you know, so we started trying really hard, but she's that kind of character. So I think it was really the Inspire. I'll let you keep going down the bullet point.
No, I mean, I would say also as well, this is again where like it's the hero design problem. Like, why was Brig created? She was like the anti.
And if you'll know, so Goats had a bursty resource in Lucio Amp, a bursty resource in Brig Bash, a bursty resource in Whip Shot, a bursty resource in DM, a bursty resource in Bubble. Like, it had so many stacked bursty resources. There were no longer longer duration resources apart from the AoE healing. And Brig gave so much AoE healing that you could just stack it up with Lucio and it was already had enough. It was like literally everything was there to cancel out the enemy team's pressure cycles into your Goats comp. It was crazy.
Well, guess what? She succeeded. But this is why we can't have characters designed to do that one thing, because it's just stupid.
Well, it was more than that though. It was she was like, her heal range was so powerful and everything, she was so powerful. She was anti everything. She did everything in the game. And the double shield tanks were the Brigs of tank. Orissa's big change that got her to do that though was the not being headshot and fortify, one of the worst changes they ever put in Overwatch 1.
I hate that so much.
It was so stupid, because you would have been able to run Reaper right at her and kill her, right? Because the Brig wouldn't be a huge threat to the Reaper. And even if, to be honest, if they had kept updating the game, imagine Ramantra against that double shield bat Brig top. I think he cleaves it so hard. That's just me though. But
he does not. Well, he does if you have a Zarya with him or D.Va with him. And that's the thing. Like, we didn't design any more initiating tanks. We only made more initiating tanks once we no longer needed the initiating tanks in Overwatch 2. Once we've changed the format to not be failing because of the lack of initiating tanks. You think Overwatch 1, you had Reinhardt, you had Ball, and you had Winston. And those were your options initiating into a double shield. So yeah, like, Ram would have been really interesting, would have been really, really good, but yeah.
No, I mean, that was mostly it. Again, it just feels like a one-dimensional character design causes major issues. And then the key thing is, like, they kept nerfing things like Lucio, and it's like, you know, Brig is just different. Like, Lucio has to move, Lucio has to take action, Brig just has to kind of stand there and then just deny. And
600 HP shield, you know. Just...
Right, it's just like, and I think we'll get to this a little bit later, but it just goes to show also as well, like, the tier of development that we had at that point in time was just on another level in the wrong way. It was a joke.
It's much better now. And to shout out Alec, I think a lot of 6v6ers give Alec a lot of shit for some of his heroes. I think Life Weaver is the only whiff, in my opinion. But what do you want him to do? Like, I actually don't think Alec has done that bad of a job, to be honest with you. And like, it's because the game's problems right now.
Right.
I think other things have caused that, and he just joined the team. Like,
yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, the characters were in development for a very long time. So characters like Malga, he essentially has no input in. Kiriko's a failure. Sojourn's a failure because of the ways they play. The game has not been well treated in 5v5 in Overwatch 2 at all. Quite a lot of the new content they have put in has either been complete trash or been reverted. It doesn't make it Alec's fault. And that's the point. Like, it's very hard to assign any blame whatsoever. It's just possible to say the game's in a bad state.
What, season 2, season 3? Like, you know, it's just give him time. I think the character.
I have some hot takes on that too later.
Okay, I'll let you go for it.
We'll get to that one. All right, so Mythbuster. All we need to do is go back to 6v6. You don't say this, and most content creators, but I see this in the YouTube comments and Twitter replies all the time. Someone like, just go back to 6v6. It fixes 9% of issues. That is not even close to being true. I think some heroes are actually healthier in 5v5. I think Mei, Echo, and Sigma's gameplay loops are a lot more healthy in terms of tank busting.
Mei, Echo, and Sigma's gameplay loop, but Mei had to get gutted in order to do, like, Echo, Sigma.
Fine, but you just can't get in.
No, I don't think that's true in any way. I think that Sigma pretty much works the same. I think that Echo pretty much is as healthy in 5v5 as they are in 6v6. Are we just saying that tank busting isn't a thing you can do in 5v5, and that's why they're healthy in 5v5 because they've been reduced to tank busting? Mei's more unhealthy in 5v5 than she is in 6v6 by far. Not that Mei was a good design, but like they had to gut half of what the character Mei does in order to move to 5v5. Like, how can you say it's more permitting? Like, I don't get
options,
that.
Things like that. I think 6v6 needs just as, maybe not just as much, but needs a lot of hero balancing redesign issues as well as map design issues. We talked about those chokes, right? I think 6v6 still had archaic tank designs that weren't able to take action as often, and I still think that it limited the options of DPS support in its old state, right? I think the thing that 6v6 immediately solves is immediately helps to fix the tank psychology problem. Immediately. But I think one of your arguments was that, well, we can do these things a lot quicker in 6v6. Like, I can just snap my fingers. Me and Hawk, I think I remember saying, you and Hawk, give us a bottle of whiskey in an hour, and we'll take care of it. You know what I'm saying?
No, but actually, you can fix it with a bottle of whiskey in an hour. Literally, just look at this server, look at the code they've made, look at how it actually plays. With a couple of intelligent changes to the game, it's a balance patch away. It's not like crazy stuff in there. It's a balance patch away, just one of them.
But I think that, like, I do see a lot of people saying, oh, just go to C6, problem 6. It's like, no, that's not the case.
And here's what I'll agree with you. I do think that with the right people, it can be addressed very quickly, but it's not as simple as just go back to 6v6. Because here's the reality. Inspire would still have to get changed. BAP would still have to get changed. Like, all of those problematic designs that inevitably led to the failure of 6v6. Again, it was not the format. It was the designs behind the format. I think that from a foundational standpoint, because that tank problem doesn't exist, if you go right back to 6v6, you have a better foundation.
I think aside from AoE abilities, that obviously have to be very well balanced in 6v6 compared to 5v5. Every single other aspect of balance was easier to do in 6v6.
To then build off of and then eliminate these problematic designs, because with tanks having lower health and not being the main frequency of just constantly getting drilled by stuff and being the only one there, you just have a better foundation. And you're right, people do misspeak on this all the time. And that's the nature of the internet, though. Like, people will take their thing. And it's just, but it's important, and this is why I'm glad I had you on to have that good faith discussion, because I don't think I've ever said that once. Just going back to 6v6 magically fixes everything. Obviously, you'd have to do the balance patch. You'd have to address things. You'd have to reconsider what role passes would do, the new health pools for Season 9. There'd be a lot that had to go into it, but from a foundational level, I think
the headshot nerf was actually a really good change in terms of the consistency of damage coming into tanks. I really like that as a change.
I think you can create a better organic game if you want role.
Everything else you can remove.
And you don't want to have this problem that is, in my opinion, unsolvable via balance in this format. But again, if people want to accept that's just what tanking has to be, that's one thing. But I'm really sick of seeing, oh, this problem's solved by balance. It's not solved by balance. You can't get rid of that. That will always be there.
Sure. Okay. Going back to the anti-6v6 here, but double shield. That's all I have here.
Yeah, just fuck.
Classic lazy Overwatch 1 balance. And you remember, this is like no serious changes to double shield and Brig and BAP for not even months, but years.
Yeah. They buffed them. They buffed them. You know, that's how we went from the best patch of all time, which a lot of people are starting to say now is revisionist history. But I saw the feedback from players in all ranks that October. It was awesome. You were playing anything in ranked. Like, Ano was a little bit stronger than Moira, but you could still play the Moira, right? BAP fell off big. Brig, actually, believe it or not, was still kind of getting picked in top 500. A couple people were figuring it out. Was it Nishik? I think Nishik was still picking Brig.
Was he still playing?
He was picking Brig and ranked, and I remember him getting top 25. Everyone's like, Brig is dead. I was like, Brig is not dead. You all haven't adapted yet. I'm telling you, people will adapt and figure out, wait a minute, I just have to actually play careful on this character for the first time ever. Really.
Right.
And then, you know,
I don't see how people are saying it's revisionist history in any way. That October patch was universally loved by every single person that played the game in a serious way.
They buffed BAP window a ton. They buffed Mei. They buffed Sim. And then didn't touch anything for a really, really long time. And the reason why double shield wasn't picked was because BAP and Brig, you couldn't just hard spam it because Brig had way less health. I think they had done something to BAP, and they hadn't. I don't know if that no headshot during fortify change had come through
Probably
yet.
Jake.
I'm not sure.
I don't know
exactly
probably
when that was, but yeah,
I can't remember.
Anybody who just says, but double shield rose tinted glasses, that's not a good faith argument. That's just not true. So.
I agree. I think again, it's just another situation of like balance issues propping up something that really shouldn't be there. Broken sustain. I think like the other thing as well is we talk about like the sustain being an issue as well. But I think the problem with like a lot of these double shield and like bat brig comps is they just cheated the game again. Like they just didn't have mobility, and yet that was never seen as like a weak point. And like that's such a flawed character design. Okay, so 5v5, 6v6. So this one kind of goes both sides of the argument because I have an issue with both sides of this. 5v5 restricts hero design. 6v6 restricts hero design. The answer to both these questions is yes, but my opinion is 6v6 has to be a lot more cautious with shields and mitigation and how that mitigation is done.
I don't think in any way it has to be more cautious. I think 5v5 is far more cautious with shields and mitigation than 6v6 ever was. In every single way, yeah. 6v6 makes it easier for shields and mitigation to exist in a healthy way.
There's a danger of having too much sustain, too many shields, too many things, whereas 5v5 allows that to be a little bit less of an issue as long as you're intelligent with how it's implemented. I also think that 6v6 sometimes demands, because of the width, now we'll actually have some proposed solutions for this later on, but as of now, right now, if you made the swap, it would demand some support to output a certain amount of healing to put up 2 tank HP pools. Even with the 5v5 tanks having more health, it's nowhere near the same amount of HP as 2 6v6 tanks. I also think 5v5 demands tanks. It's more limited in its function because 5v5 demands tanks they need to have some form of range, some form of mobility, and it definitely limits the viability of enablers. That's why Zarya and D.Va felt so bad. And 5v5 is because Zarya and D.Va's initial design is an enabler of aggression. And when you have the most aggressive person on the battlefield, the other tank, no longer there, well then what is...
How is he missing this, that is close range pressure cycles in bursty periods of time instead of like this aggression like word? I feel like he's just like not thinking clearly.
This is design,
and
that's
it's not that he's wrong, he's just not thinking clearly.
Too, where in the original debate, I think Jake said something like, well, you can just bubble your DPS. It's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same.
There's only like literally a handful of DPS that benefit from that, and it's much more inconsistent.
Reaper who's just fucking unpickable.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like when a tank is only viable in certain situations, right? And well, then people say, well, just double bubble yourself, and that is viable to a certain point.
It's not.
But it's
just
not
much more difficult, and it's not. It doesn't happen as organically in the game.
Exactly.
So I got a question for you too before you move on. Which supports do you think would? Can you go back to that support point about 2 tanks? Which supports do you think would have to be changed?
I think it's not so much what supports would have to be changed as so much as like it would limit the viability of certain support duos. I'm gonna talk about this later, but we can touch on it actually now if you'd like. Where it's basically like I remember I was a tank player in Overwatch 1 for a long time, and I remember my supports pick Zen Lucio, and I was a Ryan Vincent player. Or they'll go Brig, or they'll go.
So specifically, you can't pick the low healing comps. I think he was saying, but the Mercy Zen type comps were always much more pickable in 6v6 than they were in 5v5 because 6v6 had much more focus on holding poking positions and that sort of stuff. I didn't think that was ever really healthy, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's... Lucio Zen was never pickable in either for the most part, aside from like a brief period, but there's no reason to believe that Lucio Zen wasn't pickable in the high ranks in Overwatch 1. It just never ended up happening as a meta. Nobody ever really tried it. Are the support duos restricted in 5v5 versus 6v6, or the other way around? Like, what was the restriction on support duos in 6v6? Because essentially you can't pick 2 very low healing supports together that don't control angles. I think quite a lot of this are people not really understanding the way that angle supporting healers work, the way that Zen Mercy and Brig work. I think that's kind of it, and the way they don't work with Lucio. Mercy Lucio? Well, yeah, that was the point. If we're going to pick Lucio that has a bursty resource, we may as well pick someone with enough throughput in order to keep up somebody that wants to interact in a bursty way with that resource. Mercy Lucio was a thing if you had, hyper-aggressive dive, like Bull Dive. So, like, I don't see a single way that the supports were more limited in 6v6. I guess I get what he's saying, that in 6v6 you need more sustain, but I don't think that's that true. Certainly in ladder you're more likely to pack some sustain on, but I don't think that's a problem. I think that's more or less what players want to do in low ranks in ladder, and you should probably design the game around what players generally want to do.
Brig Mercy, and like that's still a problem now, but I found it like there's so many more viable tank options because you only have supports. Now I don't think that that's unfixable. I think even like the tiny detail of what they did recently with the out of combat healing, like that would have been kind of nice in 5v5, honestly. Like you could have played Ryan Shield.
Zen was meta at some point. Yeah, that was 2 angle controlling supports, right? That was Brig to root the angle and Zen to use the angle. Like and Brig was always very good at using angles and supporting angles because you chuck the armor packs across the map in order for other angles to be more valid. You could play Brig Zen on one point and you could play a soldier or a tracer or a Cassidy on another angle or an Ashe on another angle. You chuck health packs across the map. And obviously, like, Harmony is very good for angle control. So that's how the characters interacted. It was just Lucio that was a little bit questionable because you didn't have enough bursty resources to really and enough throughput to really use those bursty resources from the amp. Yeah, and you just use the low resource requirement tanks in the comp. What we should be talking about, and we're not talking about right now. Right now, we're talking about what is generally viable. What we should be talking about is how many different combinations can low rank players actually pick that screws them. And in terms of that, the answer is probably like Mercy. Mercy's even fine with Lucio. Probably just Zen and Brig with Lucio were the only characters because they have low enough throughput that low rank teams couldn't use that. And that wasn't bad in 6v6, and I don't think it's even bad in 5v5. So why are we talking about it? It's weird.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a difference.
You could have held your shield as Ryan and healed yourself out a little bit. Like, I'm not saying it's unfixable, but that is one of the things is that in 6v6 you needed healing output. You needed healing output a lot of the time. There was a very careful balance.
True. I think in low ranks you didn't really need that much healing output. I just don't think that's true.
I think it's bad in both places. I kind of my example of that is Mercy Moira. Where you get that now, but I actually would have preferred it back then because, and here's why, and I'm curious what you'll say to this. Back when there was a tank exchange at all that was relevant, where it wasn't all stats, when both tanks were setting each other up, like you could still create an opportunity on their front line, aside from when they were playing. You know what I think it really was? I'm going to take this back to Bap and Briggs' design too, because those heroes scaled up so much more. If they had it, it was much more difficult. I see what you mean, because when those resources, those healing resources only have to get dumped into one tank, on paper. But when you have Mercy Moira now, I feel like it's worse.
I think that the difference in the supports is the difference in the playstyle that is valid in 5v5. And the playstyles are valid in 5v5 exclusively put people more towards dueling. And if you look on Overbuff, you will see every single character in the support category in the bronze rank has like a 47-48% win rate, because bronze players on support are deranking. That's what they're doing. On the whole, they're deranking over time. Like, the average is going down. And I do think half of that is the idea that if you don't do anything independently in terms of DPS duels, then you're just losing. Which means that the playstyle of heal botting is not valid, therefore there's less playstyles, which means there's less design space.
No exchange on the front line.
Well, it is because you know, 6v6 Mercy Moira, there was a demand for that much healing. Like, there were a lot of times, I remember in lower ranks, people loved the double main heals back in lower ranks in 6v6 because it's like, oh, Mercy Moira, we just dump healing in the front line and it provides something. But to me, I've always hated like glut raw healing as like utility. So maybe Mercy Moira worked better in 6v6 because there were targets that you could just vomit healing onto and get value out of, and that's less so a problem.
a little bit different. I can
right. So my problem is
competent Mercy Moira duo supports aren't as bad as Sam thinks in 5v5. But Ren, the argument is in 6v6 they were a lot more valid as a thing because the ability to put out the extra healing onto the tank, which is more or less what they intended to do, creates more opportunities in 6v6 because there's a more reasonable frontline trade. I think that's the full argument, right? Maybe you didn't say it properly. In 5v5, since there is no reasonable frontline trade, basically you'd rather have a character that has more utility because the extra bit of healing that you got onto the tank isn't worth it.
I promise that, yes, there's
Realth, respond to my DM. Right, respond to my DM.
I see what you're saying. There's like more viable support combos, but less viable support combos because in Overwatch you don't need healing. So these, but like to me that just exposes the badly designed supports.
I agree with you. I agree. Like again, if you look back at what I complained about the most, it was those supports, and I agree with you completely. I'm trying to think about like what situation would be better, because I think my point actually might be a different subject matter altogether about bringing back the tank exchange that actually matters, and I think maybe your point. So I'm not really sure how to answer that one, to be honest with you.
Sure. Maybe the short-term solution is that like the goal is just to have more utility across supports, whether they're healing a lot or not. Like in Ana is a great example, right? Like in Ana, you could run and BAP Ana, even though it's too much healing, because if the Ana doesn't have to heal, there's still things that she can do, right?
Sleep, yeah.
Right, exactly. So like that's, I guess, maybe the goal here. Okay. 5v5 has a lower skill ceiling. I don't agree with this one necessarily. Now, let me give my points here, and I want to hear what you have to say here. So I think there's inherently more individual responsibility, more individual play because of the space. That kind of goes back to the space thing. There's fewer initial targets or like late targets because you can take the tank trade, then you go for the backline. Now it's just, you just go right for the backline. But that does mean that there's more responsibility on the player to do those things. I think there's fewer enablers, of course, right? Like there is that no off-tank, main tank dynamic. I mean, I started coaching Overwatch like at 66, but this shifts more thinking of the individual. I do think there's more direct playmaking options for DPS and supports, and I think this is why a lot of supports struggled. I mean, even DPS,
according to Jeff, they were testing the game and felt 6v6 was the sweet spot. I've responded to this a couple of times. I think it's a poor argument, personally. Back there was no flex support / burst healing as well. Yeah, they basically hadn't made the video game and were just like finger to the winding. Like The ranking system did not exist when they made this, so there was no way to tell what was good gameplay and what was bad gameplay. Nobody was actually able to play the video game, so I think people saying that well, Jeff, the god of the universe, thought this one time before they made the video game that 6v6 might be the correct format is like, it's not a convincing argument anyway.
Characters struggled early on in 5v5. You remember this. All the support mains going, my role sucks. It's impossible to play.
They suck,
And this is,
yeah.
well, that's my point. That's my point exactly, is that like these support mains had spent all of 6v6 dumping healing up
That
the right
game's
side. I'm like being facetious here, but for the like a lot of sustained focus, healing, which is the least challenging aspect of support. And then now in 5v5, you have to take angles.
I don't want challenging aspects to supports.
You have to take tools. You gotta land your nades. You gotta be making plays. And then now all the supports are like, I have a.
We're talking about the skill ceiling though. We're not like the skill ceiling in 6v6 did include taking angles and supports. The skill floor in 5v5 now includes taking angles and stuff like that. It's not good to have the skill floor including taking angles and doing DPS duels, because that's bad. That's not what the average like low rank player wants to do.
So I think, this reflected, I don't know if this is the average ranked experience, I think this is where maybe people will disagree, but as somebody who's coached both 66 and 5v5, the level of DPS support play in terms of understanding the game, taking angles and proactivity, like going at it from like that end of Overwatch League until the most recent season of Overwatch League, the level of like proactivity and creativity with supports DPS, I do think leveled up. So while there was less team synergy, like I agree with that, the demands of the individual, even
No. The demands of the individual at the skill floor went up, and the demands of the individual at the high end already included proactivity. People weren't doing it just because people weren't good enough at doing it. Even in pro play, the skill ceiling did not increase because all the things that you could do were still fine. Like what?
Even at the highest coordinated level play was higher, in my opinion, in 5v5.
I disagree, and here's why. I think if these types of heroes that have been good in this game were meta in Overwatch 1 and 6v6, I would completely disagree. I think towards the end of Overwatch 1, when again those hero designs that you talked about, like those were less skillful here. Like the things that you just talked about didn't matter at the end of Overwatch because they abandoned the game. I think that in general, if these types of heroes, if those things got addressed, there's just more to do.
No meaningful
Fights are more
impact,
turnable. Yeah. Again, my point again, where I think you talk about spacing, the duels are easier to access, right? But there aren't actually more options. And I think when you had to make decisions between more options, when there were more vulnerabilities that you had to make the correct choice for them, when single target decision making was what dominated Overwatch 1, I think at that point in time, the skill ceiling was higher. I think towards the end, where it was just these massive sustainabilities, you're right. I would take this game over that because the game towards the end with Bap and Break stacking and Double Shield was truly brain dead. It really was not the same game that we fell in love with. So I think towards the end of Overwatch 1, the ceiling was lower because there wasn't a requirement to hit the ceiling. There were so many. The game was being cheated, like you said. So you're right. When the game's being cheated, Overwatch 2, definitely a higher ceiling. But when the game wasn't being cheated and those big designs, having more options, more playmaking, I think that, granted, while some of them...
Yeah, I think the conversation's really hard to have because both sides of the discussion are always arguing about what the type of game could be if it was reasonably... We're not even saying perfectly designed, we're saying like reasonably well designed within that space. And so like we're both working with hypotheticals, so it's really hard to actually like make the ends meet in the middle in a way.
More difficult,
really
a little bit more difficult to access. Those tanks were very killable. Like you saw my Hanzo back in the day. When there was a bad diva,
the best Hanzo not in Overwatch League.
Dude, I stand by that. When there was a bad diva, I would rip him to shreds, and I knew that I had those options. But now, like, and again, Hanzo is a little bit different now. A lot of these heroes are more different. Echo accessing the space easier definitely helped her a lot. I think Echo was one of the big winners in 5v5 because accessing that space a lot easier. It definitely feels like it felt like a chore to poke out some of these tanks as Echo. So now I do miss ult building on tanks. That's one of the biggest things I do miss as a DPS in this game. It just doesn't
so
matter
dopamine inducing.
I know it was like when you and one of the worst changes they made to Hog. We're gonna talk about removing weaknesses. You know what made Hog really good towards the end of Overwatch 1? The first thing that did it nobody talks about. They randomly gave him the tank passive in Overwatch 1. Do you remember that? Where they just like, they randomly
they were trying the tank passive.
I don't know if it was in
Wait,
that
no,
October.
yes they do.
They did.
They reduced the
amount of ult charge he gave. And then his pick rate in GM went way up. And I was like, dude, like what is this guy's weak point? And then they buffed his breather again. Right, and I think they give it more damage reduction, and so it was like no wonder these heroes are coming in. Like the balance team and to give this balance team credit, they're
I just
a lot
thought of
better.
something.
Yeah,
I'm interrupting you. I just realized that one of the biggest things you actually have to do with balance and hero design is you actually have to make sure that the psychology of value and that what you're actually doing like lines up. Like the thing is that you
this guy, honestly, this guy is all he talks about.
Hog but it still feels just as good to shoot Hog, so it doesn't matter. Like, you need to discourage people. Like you have to be so careful. You know?
You should encourage people to shoot Hog, though, because that should be his weak point.
Right. But my point is
I
that,
get what
like,
you're saying, though. Yeah.
It's like the tank passive. People are like, we should buff tanks right now by making it give even less ult charges.
I knew the moment that Sam said the word Roadhog, Spilo was like, I can do it. Shooting Hog feels good. Yeah, that's the problem with Overwatch. Shooting Hog feels good. That's the problem.
Almost like nobody looks at their ult charge and says, "Oh, look at that! I'm not going to shoot the tank." This
Especially
is gonna be
average players.
Right. I have to get in their head and tell them over and over again, this is a bad target choice for them to like actually make that connection. But that's not natural. And when it's not natural, it's not good.
And it's the same with, again, this has been a really constant theme that I'm glad you're talking about this. No creator has talked about, because you really have to have, and I'm not trying to undersell anybody else here, but you really have to have top level game knowledge to like pick up on these things. Like Inspire is another example, and I've talked about this for years. Why does Inspire not show? Like, how are players supposed to learn this character, right? It's just stuff like this that's just been overseen and oversight. It's just been ignored forever, and they stacked up over time. And regardless of format, I would say, Spilo, those were the biggest problems in Overwatch lifetime. Regardless of format, I think that's what caused this format change. And
I'd agree.
So that was my point. But
people say, oh, it's a skill issue, but to me, like, skill issues should always be visible. Like, when you say Genji make a crazy play, you know what he's doing. You're like, all right, I know what I need to do to get to that level. But like you're saying, if a brig gameplay is unintuitive, that's a major problem with the character design.
And that goes beyond a lot of this too, because what's so fun about gaming, and I've always said this about Overwatch, is when you're losing to something, you want the player to think, okay, I should have done this better. That's how you encourage people to go and learn the game and go up the skill to reward curve. That's what makes the experience and their time investment, which I always have said is the most valuable commodity as a game or anything in general, because you'll never get your time back. You can get money back, you can get a lot of things back. You'll never get your time back. So if you want
Okay, so let me explain this. The Kiriko thing, right? So I started making a Kiriko video, and then I made the Kiriko video and the script, and then I realized there was so much in the Kiriko script that really I was just explaining all the problems with supports, and I needed to explain all the problems in the sports to explain the Kiriko script, because essentially Kiriko has all the problems. So I was there with a chicken and an egg situation where I don't know what to make, because Kiriko has so many issues that you have to talk about all of the issues with the damn role in order to even address her. Like, Kiriko is busted. So busted that she doesn't even have a good win rate. That's how busted Kiriko is. Like, it's crazy.
Want players to sink time in, right? You have to make them think, okay, this was not the game doing this. This was my fault. And I think original Overwatch did a great job of that. But as time went on, you know, how does a Genji player beat the Moira in the duel? How do you see Inspire, right? How do you know that you shouldn't be shooting the tank because you're getting less ult charge, you're doing these things, and there's no real way to. That's another reason why personally I hate role passives. I think that if a hero needs a passive, it should.
Can we agree on deleting Kiriko from the game? No, but I do agree with you that Kiriko should have her healing per second reduced to like 60. It's currently on like 75, I think. Let's look. I think Kiriko is way too good at angles and supporting angles and using angles. She needs her throughput reduced in order to make it reasonable. Well, it depends what it is at the moment. So it's 76.5? Jesus Christ. Yeah, I thought it was like 75. Yeah, needs reducing to 60, and then she'd be absolutely fine. But then her kunai body shot damage would need to be increased slightly to account for it. And there you go. I've fixed Kiriko for the most part. Make it so that Suzu doesn't give intangibility as well, and that it just gives him invulnerability, and that'd be fine.
Personally, I think it's so they make it so hard to balance character. Look,
Kiriko should be like Zenalari, big damage, lower healing. Yeah, Zenalari and Mercy and Break, the angle supporting angle using the angle characters. Like, that's all she needs.
Top 10 leaderboard, all tracers.
They're not gonna budge on Swift Step. And Swift Step and having the amount of control over doing a duel and escaping the duel safely biases your character so much in favor of doing these duels and fighting the angles and supporting people on these angles that it's crazy that she has on par healing per second with the characters that can't do these angles. She has 7 healing per second less than Anna. And Anna can't do any of these angle support because she has no mobility, so she's not able to do them safely. So Kiriko can go and go to the other side of the map, take a duel, lose the duel, TP out. Fuck it. I'm gone. Right? It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And 7 seconds? Yeah. What idiot in Blizzard? So when Blizzard originally make hero designs, I'm convinced, personally, right? I'm convinced that what they do is they get a whiteboard and they put Kiriko in the middle, right? They go like this. They go Kiriko, right? They put a circle around it and then they mind map it. And they're like Suzu. And then they're like, oh, a TP. And then they're like, Fox. And then some idiot came along with a permanent marker. They went down here and they were like, 7 sex. Why is this the part that they're not willing to budge on? Why, like, surely somebody must have drawn that word permanent marker. Why is Roadhog's mind map of what the character's hero design or kind of like theory on like, or maybe this is like the hero feel and that sort of stuff. Maybe it's that some idiot came along with a permanent marker on Roadhog and wrote instant kill hook on it, and they wrote selfish character on it. Like, why are these the parts that we won't compromise on? Why is Roadhog not giving anything to any other hero the most uncompromisable part of the kit? Why is the being able to TP on a 7-second cooldown the bit you won't compromise on? Why is the fact that Suzo is the catch-all answer to literally everything the bit you won't compromise on? Like, what is this? It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. I don't get it.
Right, because she just benefits from that so much more than like
passive
every other
value.
character. Passive
This is what
value,
we're talking about, right? You don't. There's no sort of skill expression with that. It's the same thing. We'll get to this later, but like brainless mitigation is one of the worst things that Overwatch has introduced.
And I'll let you get back to bullet points. Go ahead. Sorry, we're going.
No, but it's fine. I agree with you in the whole hero fantasy thing of like being able to outplay somebody is hero fantasy, because the problem is how do you have all these powerful characters playing versus each other and yet the player still feels like they're powerful? And the answer has to be that you go, oh, I could have done that. I could have deflected that sleep dart.
And that's what makes you log back on. That's what makes you stay on every day and keep playing and keep grinding. And that's how the 8 to 12 hour Overwatch sessions began.
Exactly.
You know?
I agree entirely. I think there's two different theories happening here. One is the theory of a person that wants to improve and be good at a video game. The other is the theory of a person that wants to play the video game. And they are not speaking to the low rank players in any way here. Because the low rank players, yes, of course, they want to be good at the video game. They want to be able to click on things. They want to get the hit markers. They want to get kills. They want to outplay people. But there is also the other aspect of it is that they don't want to feel oppressed. We're talking about the kind of like positive reinforcement versus a negative reinforcement. There are types of people that want the positive reinforcement. There are types of people that just explicitly don't want the negative reinforcement. And that's what you give them when you force them to constantly do duels. Because some people don't want to do duels. The negative reinforcement of having a Genji on you and feeling bad even if you win the duel is worse for some people than the ability to win that duel. Okay, the ability to do that duel more often and win it more often on a Kiriko versus a Genji is worse for quite a lot of people than the ability to be on Kiriko, and if you don't do that duel, you lose the video game. Like, that is a fundamental thing, and like people never speak to it ever. Exactly. But if it feels like it's out of your control, then you have an unfixable problem.
And that's why tank feels like shit, in my opinion. But
yeah. So basically, your argument with the whole like 5v5 skill thing is more about like the characters that are being played now, like compared to some of the double shield.
In the latter half, yes. But when you had more options and more targets were killable, and your single target decision making, back when that actually mattered in the game a lot more. The ceiling was higher because there were more decisions to make, and there were just the fights lasted longer, so you had to make more correct decisions back then. There were more chances to turn it by a little bit. I'm not going to say it's some massive margin to where this game's not
a third of the vid. Well, you probably where we
there was just a little bit more of that before the game got ridiculously out of hand, and they were making Overwatch 2 tanks and Overwatch 1.
Is Cactus Puppy or is there a statistician in chat? I would love to see like an average professional team fight duration. Like, have like an idea if it's shorter, longer, by how much.
You know what's crazy too?
I said before, one of the real problems with Overwatch 2 and making the tanks real big and putting the resources in the tanks, you have to put the resources somewhere for tanks to be as effective, right? So you can't put them in the supports because that causes awkward gameplay. If you put them in the tanks, what happens is that the spreading of the fights gets bigger because the tanks can control more space in a big burst, but because of the DPS passive and the lack of support, like the lack of sustain in tanks, because Blizzard don't want to accurately control the throughput of healers, to make it so there's an even trade between putting resources in and taking resources out, so there's an actual frontline trade. Blizzard don't want to do that. So essentially what happens is you have this like stalemate at range where the tanks can technically control the space, but don't project any short range pressure, because every time you project short range pressure, you're burning down your precious resources that are never going to get replenished. I think that's a real big problem. So I agree with them on that.
I'm curious what you think about this. So one thing I've never really talked about on stream, but I noticed, and I'm trying to find the place to bring it up, is pre-double shield, even in Guild Summit, elims per 10 across the board. We're about 25 elims per 10 in ranked games. Like usually my stats be around that. Double shield comes out, we're at 17, right? Ballpark, 17, 18. In Overwatch 2, for the most part, a lot of those have been around those same 17, like 17, 18 per 10. And so...
fewer targets. You can't tag people anymore.
And I'm curious about the amount of damage that goes into the game per 10 per elim, right? Like, I wonder how tied those are. I don't know. Well,
I don't know. It's also weird things like heal passives kick in as well, so how much of it is passive healing versus actual healing as well. I don't know.
Random thought.
It's good. Tank queues are impossible to fix. I think this is a myth. I think that tank queues are always something that you're going to have to fight. Like, there are going to be...
He thinks it's a myth that tank queues are impossible to fix. Interesting.
Problem. Like
that's normally the main reason why people say, screw it off, we're doing 5v5.
Like, I think the one thing that, not you, but like the bots in the YouTube comments, people don't love playing tank in any game. Now, the nice thing about Overwatch tank is it's not like
completely different.
Right. Yeah. It's not like MMO tank. You get to do stuff. You get to do damage. You get to pop off. You get to do kills. It's way more interesting than any other tank that I think like just about any other genre, right? It's great. It's still a little bit tanky though. It's still, because the problem with like what does a tank do? Again, we talked about it baits attention. Even if there is actual threat with Overwatch tanks, these aren't NPCs that you're forced taunting, right?
It's not bait attention. It's apply soft pressure to make enemies move from areas. That's what tank does. And why are we talking about baiting attention as a yes, of course they also bait attention so that people shoot them, but regardless of they bait attention, the role is still effective because they have that soft pressure, so they can still move enemies around. I don't get it.
Unless you're playing, Orisa. But yeah, basically, you do get to do stuff, but it is a problem. Now, I think that there's ways to mitigate this largely. You talked about what was it, the October 2020? There's the bingo check mark.
The fucking golden days, man. Best day of the game.
But I think there's a couple things here. Obviously, like active balancing your game, making the game more interesting, new interesting tank characters people are going to want to play, making tank designs that are attractive to the average DPS player, like Junker Queen. People want to play Junker Queen.
So much fun.
People want to play. And this is where I'm going to get my little spiel here. There's a reason why people don't like tank when the meta tanks are Orisas and Roadhogs and old Overwatch 1 Sigmas, right? People don't want to play those tank heroes, right? Yep. Whereas if I go DPS,
enough people do want to play that. The problem with old tank is, as I said, the lack of initiators, and maybe Spilo's already there. Maybe he doesn't need any convincing. Maybe that's why he's so on the fence. I feel like most of the reason why Spilo isn't a 6v6er is just he doesn't think that 5v5 is going to happen, and he wants to fix 5v5, which is a massive amount of devotion to the game, which is fair enough.
I can, even in those metas, I can still play Genji and Hanzo and Echo. There aren't as many unfun DPS characters to play. So it's like, well, of course tank queues are a problem when you look at how disastrous. And I think we need to, I've really, the more I've gone over time, and I'm the nice guy here, right? So this is pretty rough for me to say, but I've stopped putting on the kid gloves with people that think that Orisa and Malga and Roadhog, Malga's a different one. We'll talk about maybe a lot later, but
hot take. Go ahead.
I think Malga has potential. I think his current gameplay loop is awful, but the weapon alternating and the slam has a lot of potential. But anyway, long story short, but it's like these characters aren't fun for anybody, and they hurt everybody. So stop. Like when Winston and Diva and Ryan and Zarya are meta, and tank queues are much less likely to be a problem. I'm convinced that that's the case.
So I want to add on to this and back you up. I think that you can take that discussion farther. That's true for any role, and that's been proven continuously in role queue, because in Season 7, DPS queues were instant and support queues were 50.
DPS has always had the most amount of ability to pick whatever you want and carry on it in a game or exist properly in the game. Support has had the second most. Support's a little bit pigeonholey in terms of what you can actually play on support, but mostly it's if you have enough throughput, you're fine. And then tanks have the most amount of pigeonholing, the least amount of options, the least amount of you can pick the character you want, and the least amount of variety. So no shit that tanks have a lower pick rate. It makes entire sense. Even if we just said that, oh, I guess people are going to pick the roles dependent on the interest in the roles, dependent on the amount of variety in the roles, the amount of heroes. That's like the simplest version. Then we'd expect the most people to pick DPS, the second most support. Even in that scenario, the tanks are still overrepresented. I can't put my headphones on with it. I thought I'd... hat.
15 minutes. Want to know why? Because the sustain got so crazy in that season that it wasn't even worth playing DPS, and it felt like shit to play. So guess what happened? The product offering was bad, so people didn't play it. Now, am I saying if you make tank fun, it's going to get queued as much as DPS or support? No. But you know what?
If you make tank fun and make the variety and playstyles as diverse as DPS and support, I see no evidence that people won't queue it as much as DPS or support. Are we saying there's like 20% tanks, like 40% DPS, and like 45 and then 25? Is that what we're saying? 45 and then 25? Is that what we're saying? Like tank, DPS, support? Is that the statistics? Because even then, that's about representative for the population of the tanks, right? That's kind of representative. That's fine. There are more support players? Yes, there are more support players. But I think it's pretty clear that support offers a unique playstyle that doesn't force you to interact with damage sources in the game or DPS in the game or 1v1 duels. Question here. If we take out the Mercy players, just take out the Mercy players, the people that don't want to interact, the Mercy and Lifeweaver players, would they be the same? Like, we have this extra amount of people that just don't want to interact with the aiming system. If we take these out, like, would it be more or less the same? Or
to make tank queues optimal, they don't have to be.
Because tank doesn't have an option of not interacting with the aiming system or the positioning system in a massive way, really. Girls would quit the game. Well, no big losses at Ren.
As cute as everybody else, there just has to be enough players playing the fun characters that have fun gameplay loops to get in there. Heroes like Queen. If heroes like Queen had been in Overwatch 1 or Ramatra instead of Orisa and Sigma, the role would have been queued just fine. And the metas that weren't double shield proved that. Now, there were the issues with queue times right when they went to 6v6 role queue, and this is a role queue problem. This is not a specific one role like by itself. Like, this is a role queue problem in general. If you fuck up one of the roles and they are not fun, you will box queue times for everybody. And that's where, like, in role queue, how you balance the game and the product offering you have, it is much more important to be precise with balance and actually encourage this, because it will weigh on the queue times. So I agree with you 100%, though I think that's an even bigger concept. I think tank is a small piece of that puzzle, and you've seen it rarely, though, when things have gotten out of hand, happen to the other roles too. But that's completely right.
I think it's definitely a point for 5v5. Like, let's not lie, but it's just something that I think does, like all points, gets a little bit exaggerated, and I think that there's ways to mitigate it. And if we're gonna have a good faith debate, we do have to bring that up.
I wouldn't even say it's a point for 5v5, because if the game experience is worse, and that
everyone was saying at the launch and all the way through for like the first 3 years, why are there no supports and tanks? And the answer was because Blizzard for some reason thought there was a defense category that really was just more DPS characters.
Causes less people to queue it, then that's just, I would say it's neutral, because you lose a lot of tank players too. So
I see what you're saying.
It's a bit of both. I will acknowledge, obviously, if you cut one player out,
it's like it's an ethical thing. It's like, is it better to have a better game with a slightly longer queue time, or is it better, like, what's going to make
how do you know
more
what
happy?
Wins, right? How do you know what wins?
Right, exactly.
It's a hard conversation to have.
All right, we're gonna get into another point here. We were talked about this one earlier. This one's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine because I'm a known Blizzard shill. Overwatch 1 devs were better. I think this is a myth.
What the fuck are you talking?
And this is another one of those YouTube comments. You Twitter replies things. You know, everyone's got the Jeff Kaplan. Okay, so I'm not gonna even say anything.
Jeff lucked into something, in my opinion, really well with first 4 tank heroes. It was Winston, it was Reinhardt, it was D.Va and Zarya, and that was the core of Overwatch for so long, and that was why Overwatch was so good. If Overwatch had worse tank heroes, I think Overwatch would have been a dumpster game. I think if Winston wasn't in the game for 6 months or a year after launch, I think the game would have been absolutely significantly worse. Obviously, it wouldn't have affected the gameplay and the people that played it as much as you think, but I think they accidentally lucked into really good gameplay loops, and then they didn't know what they had and squandered it for the next 5 years.
I'll get my points in a second. You know what was going on.
Before the game released, Blizzard didn't expect that people would latch onto the one hero and play them no matter what. I think that's telling about how much they understood what they made. Yeah, completely telling. The Blizzard devs were World of Warcraft level designers. That's what they were. They were not FPS devs. They had no experience in FPS mechanics. I see no reason to believe that any person on the dev team had actual FPS experience apart from map making. I've looked for it. I've looked for the dev team. Obviously, the people in the back did, but none of the leads had any experience in terms of FPS, and that's why they made really weird decisions like acceleration being instant in the game. They made bizarre decisions because they had no experience. So they were making an incredibly cool, well-designed, amazing art assets, beautiful story, lovely cinematics, really good gameplay, but I think they lucked into that game that just had, like, they were just making whatever, and that's why it was so beautiful, because they were mad scientists in a lab not knowing what they shouldn't do, and then they just patched it and made it better in retrospect, and quite a lot of the problems were fixed by the fact that you could just swap heroes when they fucked up. that was cool. It was cool. I liked it. I was really happy with it. But as time went on and they started designing things that are worse and worse and worse, or worse in terms of the design space, and they didn't start learning from the design space, and all the halo effect of the game in the first little bit blew over, and then nothing more like Winston, Zarya, Reinhardt, and D.Va got actually introduced, I think people realized that they were just they lucked into it. It was pure chance.
Kaplan was the problem. I love him. His design philosophy was the problem. He is accountable. He might not be directly responsible. He is accountable as a game director for Moira, for Brig, for Goats. He was a beloved guy, great guy, a legend in the gaming space. But when I asked him directly in the Q&A, and I said, do you think these characters are problematic? Word for word, he said that they wanted to make a complicated game at first and make it easier over time. But what they didn't recognize is that they weren't making the game easier. They were replacing what made the game fun. Like you said, they added cheats to the game. Brigitte was a cheat to the game.
There's just no way to make it simpler over time. There's just no way to. You make a game with simple kits that interact in a complicated way. You cannot make the game more simple by adding more characters with more complicated kits, or even different kits, because the complexity of the game comes from the interactions between the heroes. It's really that simple. So adding extra characters just makes weirder interactions between the heroes, and adding characters with loaded kits like Sigma just makes worse interaction between the heroes in general. And then you end up in horrible places because you don't understand that the complexity in your game was emergent, and that was the fun part.
Sigma was a cheat to the game. Orisa with no headshot crit was a cheat to the game. BAP was a cheat to the game. So look, the Overwatch 2 balance and dev team has been significantly better than anything. The Overwatch 1 devs tried to nerf break 25 times.
Characters that straight up ignore hero interactions? Yeah. Look, why would creating a character that ignores the interactions or reducing the amount of interactions for 5v5 make your game better? I don't get it.
And still didn't solve it. 25 times. And people are going to sit here and say, this is why I say, look, there's things I disagree with about the direction Overwatch has gone now. But this team is way better than what happened back in the day.
Jeff Goodman.
Jeff Goodman, just God bless him, but just did not understand the heroes that they were making to the game.
It's bizarre to me that people can be paid full time to think about this game and design the heroes in this game and not understand how Bursty of resources interact with a pressure cycle. It is crazy to me. The fact that Orisa was released with talk about an anchor tank just like blows the entire game open. Obviously, the devs now know how a pressure cycle works, but in terms of how resources are used in order to make the pressure cycle better or worse, the fact that the abilities like Lamp turn up with a ridiculous amount of healing per second when they're instant reactive.
As well as, wasn't Jeff Kaplan or that group, why we have 5v5? Like, weren't they the guys that pulled the trigger on that?
So
I remember the BlizzCon announcement with Overwatch 2. That was when they announced 5v5.
I would it's hard to say. I would assume, yes, Jeff was the one that announced it, but I would assume that Jeff had already been pseudo fired or was on his way out at the time, and I would assume he had already been told what they're doing with the video game. I don't know if it was Jeff's idea to do 5v5. It was Jeff's idea to completely abandon the game and do PvE. Jeff did absolutely 100% decide that Overwatch was not getting updates for until they finished PvE. That was a decision. I don't know how there weren't 2 people left over to do balance patches that would want to put entirely on the PvE project, but then COVID something etc.
It was BlizzCon Line in 2021. In 2019, they were still 6v6, and something between 2020 and 2021 was when that decision was made. From if you follow the timeline, I don't really know. It's hard to say. I think the company was.
I know Alec wasn't here until
season 2 or 3. Josh Snow was here. Josh Snow was here the whole time, which is why I was not. I'm unsure what to think about the guy, because do you remember the infamous Genji's the number 6 hero forum post? And he's performing well.
No, I don't.
Oh god! So in 2020 or 2019, right when it was double shield, they gave May multi-freeze, and it was like you were freezing the whole team's walking in. And,
so do
you remember the forum post where it was like, actually, Genji's the number 6 performing hero in the game, but everything felt like fucking shit to play. And then I sat down on stream and played Genji, and there was my most viewed clip is the devs are right. I'm fucking blading on Havana with Bongo and shit. It's just fucking down mid, right? So like I know they've been there. I'm not gonna pretend to know the whole details. I'm skeptical on it all, but here's what I can say. Like the reality is, this is not Overwatch 2 has not been perfect by any means, right? But the balance team in particular and the dev team and the hero design, I don't think there's been any cheat heroes. I think the most problematic thing
the hero design gets better when the devs know more about the design space of the game and what you can design that is healthy in the game. Of course, they've got better knowledge of what the design space of the game is. The game's been out for 8 years. Like you can't compare it in that way. Because their knowledge of what the game is and what is healthy in the game should be developing over time. We should be judging whether they're able to make healthy stuff in the game. And the fact is, if they do know stuff and they're still making characters like Malga and they're actually releasing that and never fixing it, and they can make characters like Lifeweaver and release that and never fix it, are they better? Or should they know better by now? Yes, they are strictly better at making a video game, but they've had 8 years of this video game's history in order to work out what's good and what's bad. So, like, saying they're better, I wouldn't like to say either way. Obviously, like, it's nice for both of these people to be able to go on stream and say, of course the devs are better. Because if the devs ever see this, they'll be like, we'll accept this a bit more. And it makes this whole thing a bit more valid. And nobody likes to shit on the people that they know and the people that are currently on the dev team. Because why would you do that? It's like, is the development direction better enough considering the extra stuff we know now? Or is it just about the same?
I don't
It's
know
hard.
what you, in my opinion, is Life Grip. Suzu was another
Yeah.
Jeff Goodman one. I'm not a big fan
Yeah.
of any of the immortalities because I think they're cheats to the mid fight. But yeah, ridiculous comment. Ridiculous comment.
Maybe a format thing more than anything else.
Yeah.
I think also as well as like
Mercy.
people, right? One thing that people do have to remember is the development cycle back in the day was awful, and this is a lot of people blame this on the Overwatch 2 thing, which I think is a little bit of bad faith. Obviously,
No,
when it was
it's
at
not.
it was worse, but before that, it was
Months.
really bad. It was really bad. Like we just didn't have development we didn't have balance updates. Like we are so spoiled right now. Even if the changes aren't always good, it's just interesting. I'm curious to go try this stuff out.
Going over the low bar of the minimum that you should put into your game in order to make it a product that you have a battle pass for. The devs are under delivering, and I think they will always under deliver because Blizzard does not have the resources or is unwilling to give them more resources. I think the devs are hitting the bar. They are 100% hitting the bar. The game is fine, but saying that the devs are really good now because previously the devs abandoned the game for years and had one hero release every like 3/4 of a year it's like, come on. The fact is they weren't hitting the bar before and hitting it now is like, yeah, they are better. Of course they're better, but they should be a lot better.
Like it was really hard to be a content creator back then because you go for 3, 4, 5 months before
And
the
if they
Overwatch
fucked
2
up-
announcement. Yeah, you're done. That's it. You're gonna have to live with that mistake until like Christmas, basically, is the kind of where we were at. I think also as well, like you were talking about some of the problematic heroes: Orisa, Sombra, Sigma, Moira. These are Overwatch 1 characters.
DPS Doom.
You're right. I'll go even deeper than that. The word on the street, I have no confirmation of this at all, but I have word on the street is that some of the more problematic characters in Overwatch 2, like Lifeweaver, I don't think that's the new hero design team.
Yeah, they were in development.
That's what
Really?
I don't think that's the new hero design team. I don't take my word on that.
I would
that
love
is,
some
there should be
clarity.
some. I know exactly. We needed like we don't. I don't. Obviously, they're never going to give it to us because they don't want us pointing fingers like I am. But I am.
Oh, I pointed
I
the
think that
fingers
is.
and I didn't regret it.
Like
It was
those
their
designs.
fault.
There are some designs that have been in the closet, have been in the pantry, saved up for a little bit, right? I think. So
Of course, yeah.
we'll have to kind of keep an.
I think the standard hero design cycle is 2 years. They probably like had a concept for a character with a life grip and stuff like that in like 2019, and then it got shelved for a year or two for COVID and for like other things. Life We're in the Closet, epic Eben joke there. Eben gamer with a hard R joke. Yeah, but of course, yeah, it got shelved for a couple of years, and then they started redevelopment, and they picked up the idea, and of course they used the old designs, but I don't see a reason why they couldn't have retooled the designs for Overwatch 2.
Because it is odd to see somebody as
You can't say
reasonable-
it's fine somebody else designed it when you're the one actively developing the game. Like,
was
come
now,
on.
like and be like, really like.
Well, and I agree with you there. Like, I think like people, like, there've been a couple times where the only time I'll rage at Alec is for fucking Lifeweaver, but that's not him, and that's fine. But you know, to compare, Alec has done, like, if you look at the heroes I've been putting in the game, like Alec's done a significantly better job than what was there previously, and I always get a little confused when people are like, it's all Alec's fault. I'm like, guys, like, what is Alec? Like, he designed. Like, what do you?
Right.
What do you? Well, I guess that kind of goes hand in hand. But I think like the big issues that at least people in my
Not
chat
true,
have been
they
having
don't
is, and a
create
lot of
the
those people
gameplay
are gravitating towards me is like again the difference between the gameplay loops of 6v6 and 5v5. Like, that's not a hero design thing particularly right here. That's something different. So to anybody, but again, back to the point, completely anybody who says that the Overwatch 1 team was better, just you're huffing copium. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Right.
Absurd.
Okay. I'm going to pop this one your way, and I'm not going to give any thoughts. I want you to give your rant first. So 5v5 tanks limit hero designs because they force tanks to have basically no weaknesses, and a lot of them end up being homogenous designs. I understand points of this one. I don't fully agree. I'll give my points, but I want to hear your takes
So
first.
this was more so Hawk's point than mine.
Yeah.
No, I think it's very true. If a tank has to be able to have some sort of control of high ground, has to be able to have some sort of mobility, has to be able to have some sort of ability mitigation, etc., 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 in order to like exist, you're reducing the design space because they have to have certain things. You can't design them without the things. Therefore, the actual things you can design are less. And yes, the characters that were more extreme were the more problematic heroes, but the characters that were but those characters were kind of valid, and they were a valid design space in 6v6, whereas they're not valid design space in 5v5. It doesn't mean that the characters that are more homogenized are bad. Yeah, Ren, Queen is a good example. Overcomplicated heroes. Yeah, they have to be a little bit more complicated. It doesn't mean that any of these like homogenized characters are bad. It doesn't mean that these characters can't be visually and mechanically distinct, but it does mean that there are some design spaces that you cannot occupy, and we cannot trust Blizzard to not design in these design spaces because they don't know where these are. It's like there's a chessboard where if your pawn goes on 3 of the places, you just go straight through and you lose the pawn. And Blizzard is just randomly moving the pawns around, kind of thing. It's just random as to whether you end up with a bad hero. And people are like, well, just don't design in the place with the holes, or don't move your pieces to the places with the holes. Chess isn't broken if we have these holes. And I'm like, why don't we go to a game mode where they can't accidentally put stuff on these holes because they don't know what they're doing? Queen Hog Malga straight up feels like the same kit but distributed differently. Well, there was the whole thing that people thought that Queen was a redesign for Roadhog that could put onto a different character midway through development, and that's why Knife and Hook feel similar.
I agree with him, but I think that in this game, kind of like you said, like the tanks by design have to have more options in terms of what they can cover because they're solo tanking. And I think that takes away from some unique designs. I wouldn't say it's exclusive. Like, for example, I think Queen can kind of do it all. Well, not all of it, because she loses to poke, but I don't think that's like when a hero's iterated in the way that Queen was and implemented that way. I don't think that's problematic, right?
Okay.
I think I'm not a huge fan of Ram just being able to permablock. I think
agree.
my main issues with how tanks are coming out is that the ways that they have to express themselves is more limited. That's more where I lie, where like that initial like the tank exchange, like that's where I think the biggest problem is. But if these tanks like Ball, for example, or Hog, for example, more extreme designs that had unique niches that gave them a unique identity that would get dedicated and
are now invalid in 5v5. Yes.
Don't get me wrong, I'm a Hog hater, right? But you know, I still
the worst problems were less worse in 6v6, therefore the devs have more room to design like idiots. And if Blizzard and Overwatch has ever showed me anything, it's that the devs should have more room to design stupid things.
A hater too, and I would rather not see her one shot get removed as much as I want it to be. Right. I understand why they can't, because like that type of player gets attracted to the game. I'm willing to put my personal bias to the side and say, okay, for a holistically more healthy game that has more gameplay offerings, that's how you get people to play. Those can exist. Those types of characters can't exist. So I think you're a little bit more boxed in terms of what you can do, unless you buff Hog stats to the point where you can't die.
100%.
And I think that's slightly worse than it was before.
Sam's got
actually
it.
Had that option.
I'm surprised that Sam's got it. Yeah.
Opportunity, but is it the end all be all? Because like I know people hated Malga. I like playing Malga. I think he's fun. I think his mechanics are cool. He just doesn't have I played it, and he was really fun in 6v6, by the way. In the 6v6, like Malga, Overdrive only worked on yourself. Like abilities like Overdrive, right? I hate how they have to work for the whole team. I hate it. I hate it so much. Like the fact you could stack your like the amount of times before Hunter's one shot got removed that Malga shot and I headshot somebody that's sitting next to him and they don't die. It's like, dude, like for fuck's sake, like why do I deserve to get less value from that? Because he presses E. That's not skill expression, right? And those kind of interactions happen more in this game now. Though I'm curious if they have to. Because that could be a design issue.
Well, that's my argument. That's my argument. I do think the format exacerbates it. I do think the format exacerbates it because a lot of tanks do need some form of mitigation, right? They do need some form of mitigation, but how the mitigation is introduced is like my key thing. I also think like one of the
just how long do you think it's going to take Blizzard to fix this? How many months? How many how long do the DPS queues have to get before Blizzard is able to do anything to fix this? Even if it's theoretically fixable today, how long is it going to take?
Classic problems with design is because we put so much emphasis on tank, because of the psychology of the
and the thing is, it will take time. Unlike the 6v6 thing, which is not a rework of abilities and not a redesign of abilities. How long do you think it will be before Blizzard even agrees that it's a problem to be fixed? Yeah, and it's not... 6v6 wouldn't require redesign of characters because more things in total can exist in 6v6. There's less problematic or shaky design space. So essentially, like, we solve quite a lot of the issues and the rest is balancing. But in 5v5, there are certain hero design concepts and a lot more hero design concepts that are bad. So essentially, you have to rework the heroes in order to fix it, which I think will take Blizzard so much more time that it's basically useless to do because they're not going to do it before the tank player base drops to the point where the game's unplayable for the DPS players. It's that simple. Like, it's a lowest amount of work for the devs kind of like argument here. I'm saying it would be less work to go back to 6v6, make a common sense patch, than it would be to rework half the tanks, to give them reasonable counterplaying, sustain, or outplaying options against other things. I think it's harder for the devs. I do think it is. In a more abstract kind of way, it reduces the amount of things they can design, which I hate because the devs have always been best when they're the mad scientists making whatever the hell they want in their lab, and then they release it into the wild, and we work out how to use it because the devs sure as hell aren't going to work out how it's meant to be used. Am I still here? Did I drop out?
The big fat guy, right? Is that we forget that there's a lot of...
If I go to 6v6, you're going to have to rework the other half of the tanks. The 6v6 code that we're using for Pugs proves that numbers tweaks are the only things you have to do for 6v6. I think the 5v5 redesigns have to be a lot worse. think it's too small scale to tell. Sure-ish. However, I think characters like Lifeweaver are invalid in 5v5 as a design and valid in 6v6 as a design. I think characters like Roadhog are valid in 6v6 as a design and invalid in 5v5 as a design. I think that design space of this selfish tank hero is not possible in 5v5 in a reasonable way without reworking the character into a more team-focused character. I think Bull cannot exist in 5v5 without having some sort of way in order to interact with his team, like the overshield health. I think that is what I would define as a rework, and the changes to 6v6 for Bull to be reasonable are essentially just changing his health bar. The code seems fine. It's working with common sense numbers tweaks, a patch instead of a rework. And I do feel like the 5v5 characters, especially like the characters with no ability mitigation, need some sort of rework in order to be reasonable in a healthy design space without counter swapping happening, etc, etc, etc.
Like you said, the Widowmakers that are just as problematic and just as caricature extreme designs and have been problematic in Overwatch 2 and in Overwatch 1 as well. I think even Reaper, at least in his old design slash kind of
middle ranks was a problem.
Right. Like there's certain situations where you play Reaper and there's literally nothing you can do. You do not have like Shambali third point, Havana third. Like you can't do anything. There's not an angle or a flank, or you can't do anything.
Havana's map design problem.
Well, right, but exactly. But a lot of these things are exacerbated by that, where like you have these characters that.
I think 6v6 is harder for casuals, that it's harder to read and understand. I think 6v6 is easier for casuals because I think there's a more easy objective in front of you called shoot the enemy and heal your team. I don't think the casuals understand everything going on in 6v6 or 5v5. I think the game's way too complicated to understand the game properly, like what's actually going on the map, until you hit Diamond. Realistically, anyone in Bronze is shooting people in front of them and healing people in front of them for the most part, and generally jumping in with Winston or generally going to try and hit things with Reinhardt. They're doing stuff. They don't understand. The fact that you feel overwhelmed in a game, I feel is the problem. If you feel overwhelmed by the things going on, the game's in a bad state. And I think 5v5 and the lack of stability in the team comps in terms of having less off-tank peel and less sustain and less stable poking angles leads people to a more feel of oppression and things happening to them. And the fact that you can heal less, there's less people in front of you there, or the less people in front of you to DPS. It leads you a lot faster towards I don't really know what I'm doing than the 6v6 format does. And that's not based off anything. There's no, like, the people that have left because of the abstract feel of the game don't leave a review saying the abstract feel of the game feels slightly oppressive in 5v5 because the Genji's on me, so there's no way to litmus test this, there's no way to prove it. This is just a common sense thing I'm trying to argue. 5v5 is faster, which is worth for a casual. You could say it's faster, yeah. Less stable, I'd say. I feel oppressed when I mash my head to almost get a value, then all of it gets denied by someone pressing a single button. Yes. However, you probably play the game more than the casual player. Are we talking about the kind of player that exists and just like tries the game, maybe spends a cosmetic, maybe gets ranked into silver and leaves the game for some undefined reason? I think that person's more likely to enjoy the 6v6 format because there are more easy, understandable things to do in front of them in the 6v6 format than the 5v5 format. That's my opinion. I think the 6v6 format is better. I think you can stand more in the open in the 6v6 format and stand in a stupid place and not do duels and exist. And people like to exist.
Excel in these niches. Like, how do you play Widowmaker and Legion Tower Control Center, right? Is that a map design problem or is that a hero design problem?
They still fucking do. They still, some of these freaks still do.
I know they do, right? I know, but that's the example. I do agree with you that with 5v5, the fact that the tank does need to have more mitigation things, it does mean that you have to be walking very carefully about how the mitigation is done. I have a hot take. I think Winston's fine in Overwatch 2. I think 90% of the issues with Winston in Overwatch 2 are the characters that shouldn't exist in Overwatch 2.
I hate armor changes, though. I can't kill him. Like, it's so noticeable as DPS.
No, Winston actually is really problematic right now.
I haven't talked about it yet. It's like, okay, so now I just can't do damage to this guy because we had to do this because it feels like these kids are getting blown up, and that's one of the big reasons why I don't think that had to be in 6v6. I think that does have to be in 5v5. Stuff like that where it's a much finer wine. It's a much finer line.
Wait a second. What did you start drinking?
Yeah, dude, honestly, I've stopped drinking. I've been on the gym grind, dude. I got my muscle milk right here. I'm about to go dive with the family after this. My neck was sore for 2 days.
I saw some post about Samito's arms looking like tree logs, so I had to see
these kids are so fucking weird, dude. I don't know. Anyway, but to your point, and this is where I think it has gone to bad faith, and I agree with you 100%. This is never where I wanted it to go, but unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately because it's good to see the game in a spot where people are passionate and things are. This is better than the Dark Ages. It is. It is absolutely. And I tell people this. I say this is better than the Dark Ages. So people are passionate and care. But kind of like the conversation we had on Group Up, where especially when those pro players go, it's entertaining, but it's like, oh man, guys, we're gonna lose the ball. We're gonna lose the ball here a little bit. So again, I think that it's both.
If there's anything Overwatch has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's that pro players are just children that got given a mouse and keyboard and become good at clicking things. In their very narrow range of stuff. They've never had to think about the video game beyond what is good in order to win the video game. They are not designers. They are not people that are good at speaking fluently. They are not interesting for the most part. Even if they are entertaining, they're not interesting in the things they have to say. Apart from, like, obviously a few notable examples.
Design and format, but I think the format makes it much more difficult to.
I could agree with that. I could agree with that. One of the things that I guess we'll talk about it later, but one of the things is like even just the fact that you can enable a tank to close the distance covers some of the weaknesses of that tank, and even just splitting people's attention. Right. Like even if you're running a Rhine Hog, like the Hog taking an off angle and shooting things does mean that's easier for you to close the distance as Reinhardt. So you 100%. Don't need the amount of.
And it means that the enemy team invests more into the frontline trade with Rhine Zarya versus Rhine Hog. Then the fact that the Zarya is having to concentrate on the Reinhardt to bubble them means that there is more of their focus on the main angle, so the Hog's able to do more on the off angle, which is a equivalent trade for the most part. 133 comp games this season. Yeah, but most of it isn't actually playing the game. Most of it is I have streamed for 4 hours that day, and I turn on the game. I play one game that evening with a beer. It's not really like I'm there like grinding out comp games.
One thing I will say is that, like, regardless of 5v5 or 6v6,
it's not like I'm concentrating most of the time.
Like, it is just
I haven't tried to improve myself in a very
like, you
long
just
time.
cannot have things like ram block. You cannot have things like Orisa Fortify with no headshot damage. You can't have things like cardiac overdrive. Like, it just doesn't belong in the game. And this is a bit of a hot take as well. Maybe it's not that hot of a take, but like Hog vape is brainless mitigation. It's not just a mitigation of the vape, but it's also the fact that he just heals.
And he just walk away. He does no positioning requirement. So if you're going to remove the positioning requirement, why does he get damage mitigation?
Right, exactly. Bubble, I think Sigma's pretty good in Overwatch too. I think he's not the most fun, but he's the shield shift.
Regarding the philosophy of the devs, they say they want minimal CC, then change their mind to no hard stuns. They also said they wanted the single tank should feel made powerful, then proceeded to nerf tanks one by one and made the support OP meta. I think that the problem is the game actually isn't fun when the tanks are really overpowered. I think that's the problem. Too much of the fun in the game is in that one or two people. And then you have the trouble where because so much of the power in the game is in the tank role, if you make that really powerful, people will just actively counter swap that on the DPS and support category. So the game's in a lot more of a more healthy state when the DPS and the support have more power. But that means that the tank, even if they are impactful, has to feel bad.
Like there's some
he's the only one who's been good the entire time on his maps where he excels.
Right.
He transitioned perfectly because he was a raid boss tank in Overwatch 1, and that's why he broke the first game. So
right. But so there's like choices in skill with how and when you block Zarya bubbles, stuff like that. Even Junker Queen, right? Like her speed through shout, her self heal that has to be done through skill of actually landing your abilities, right? Like every tank, a lot of these more healthy tank designs, like actually, like if I get slept as a Winston, I'm like, crap, I messed up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas Orisa with
Fortify
either dies.
For instant breaker bubble.
Right, exactly. But whereas Orisa with Fortify, either she's unkillable or she gets discorded and dies instantly, and there's nothing she can do about it because she's too fat and slow. It's the
game playing for you. You're not playing the game.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of it. My argument is that like format exacerbates it, but it is a hero design issue. I guess we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, we got two more.
I do think that the Spilo always skips the step of that it's a hero design issue. Always a hero design issues, but the bad hero designs are worse in the 5v5 format by far for the health of the game.
Little myths to bust here. Okay, I'm a 5v5 shill. Samito is a 6v6 shill.
Here's where I'll say this, and I kind of posted a video reacting to GS. I don't know if you saw GS Raider's video. Holy fuck!
Which one was that?
Overwatch.
GS Raider?
Did you guys watch the GS Raider video, by the way? It is hilarious. He is not afraid to just... He basically there just like being an asshole to everyone that exists. It is so funny. It's so funny.
My style of video. I don't make that style.
Wait, was the shill one?
Yes.
People ask me to watch that on stream, and I'm like, I'm not.
You should watch it.
Okay,
I'm not watching that. Is it monetized? Did he monetize the video? No. Okay, I'll give him credit for that.
He actually has a point in there where he's saying this video isn't monetized because I use the One Piece soundtrack. So he's
good for him.
I will give him credit. He's the only person in the scene that kind of called us out about Overwatch 2 in general, how we were all like hyping it up and then like the things happened. We have to cope him. I will give him credit. He's the only one who saw through it, and I do appreciate that. But where was I going with this? There was a... Oh yeah, I will say I reacted to that. And I think the Shilling accusations have gotten I think in general, it's gotten a little too far out of my league for what I want to deal with, from whether it be people personally insulting someone like you, other creators in the scene name calling me some things that we won't name, but we got a good laugh out of. You know, it's just, that's not my style. I don't think that's the direction the conversation needs to go. Are there shills? Yes, there's shills anywhere you go. Are there people? They'll be able to find anything anywhere you go, right? And it's not.
Right.
Does that mean everyone's doing it? No, especially when I feel like, at least on the debates that I've been on and you've been on, at least here, that we've been able to have very honest and just forward conversations that don't devolve to the pro player speak, we'll call it.
Right, exactly.
And so people can have opinions. I think it's silly. I think, especially if anybody's saying that to you, you're the only person I've seen that's actually approached the argument from, let's look at reality here. And I feel like I'd like to say that I've done the same thing, because trust me, like, and this is what frustrates me so much about people in the 5v5 camp saying the opposite. And don't get me wrong, the 6v6ers do the same thing, obviously, but you guys really think I didn't fucking sit there for, like, there was like 3 or 4 months I didn't play this game. You really think I didn't sit there and think about this extensively, like, at night? Just, dude, my brain doesn't shut off. Like, you do coach forever. You get it. And you always, you can lay down, you
shower,
think,
man.
every shower, every walk, like, I can't tell you how many walks I take after scrims and just think, and it's just, you know, a lot of thought has been put into a lot of this from a lot of people. It's easy to tell the people who are genuinely thinking about things, who are genuinely approaching it from right angles and considering ideas, and the people who aren't. Try to surround yourself with the people who are thinking about things. And that's why it frustrated me a lot to see people grilling Avril when he had his take about like making tanks squishier and be like, you should see how brain dead Avril's take was. And I was like, that's a valid what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
it's called I think it's called the halo effect, right? But like the negative, where people like get an initial, because you were the guy that disagreed with Avril initially, right? Yeah. Whether the quality of that 5v5 66 debate. So then everything that Avril says is immediately thrown in the garbage.
And it goes beyond this debate. It's a culture thing in society.
It really is.
Where
it really is.
You associate more with a side, especially in politics. I'm not looking forward to this fucking fall. I am not looking forward to this fall. Where people feel like they have to pick a side instead of looking at the actual substance of what's going on. And that's
I was talking about this with chat just before, where people were like, are you like the 5v5 66 centrist? And I'm like, no, I think there's aspects of 66 that would desperately need changing and are problematic. I think
he's actually someone that's looked into the issues. That's the difference. So like the centrist is a person that for the most part, that doesn't want to be involved in the discussion, doesn't engage in the discussion, doesn't know anything about it, and therefore is like, but you can fully commit to the issue, be fully involved, and still be in the middle. Like that's different than
a lot of aspects of 5v5. That doesn't mean, like, why am I a centrist for
acknowledging the promise of both? It's
like half of me is here and half of me is there. You know, it's like that should be. Yeah, I agree.
World's not black and white; shades of gray.
And I also think, like, when it comes to like the shill thing, it's like to really know like what a person's like quality of character is, you have to get to know them. And I think that's where like you and I have always had that relationship. Like where people always like, oh, Smito's another rant video.
A centrist is someone who has takes from both sides. Yes, or it's somebody that doesn't want to decide on an issue or can't be asked to go into an issue and says they're centrist because of it. No, being center is ideally, obviously, someone who's fully committed to knowing stuff about the issues, but doesn't. But it also attracts a lot of people that just don't want to know about the positions in general. In the same way that either side will attract the same. It's not like a centrist, like saying you're in the center is this whole thing where you're like above it and you don't want to be involved because it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's just unhelpful to the discussion in general.
No, I don't always agree with everything you say. You don't always agree with
it.
But I know that, like, I know that you're passionate about what you do and you actually care about what you're doing. And it's like, it's really easy to like just get an initial impression and just write a person out. It's like, but you don't know the guy. You know, you don't know the guy. Like, anyway.
We could go on for this for hours, but I will stand on the hill that I think it's going a little too far. And
I agree.
It doesn't happen. Are there?
No,
yes,
I think it's hilarious. I think the whole scape of Overwatch should keep blowing up over every single discussion. People should get more and more radical on their sides, because I think that is hilarious to watch.
But it's not everybody, and it's like Colin, like looking at what Flats has gone through to like be like the one of the faces of Overwatch and how fucking hard that is to do. Because like that was me for a while, dude. It psyched me out. Like my mental health tanked when I was on Mayhem. Like I had everything. I tell people this. I said I had everything that I wanted from the Overwatch scene at that point in time, and yet I was more miserable then than I was anytime I was doing my own thing. Which is just crazy. It's just funny how life works that way. So don't judge a book by its cover. I think I
would agree with that. I would agree with that. Take each argument at face value as best as you possibly can. Anyway. Okay. Last myth here. 5v5 games are more consistent result-wise without having two tanks. This one I've seen only a couple of times, but I think it's a good.
Can you say that again?
So basically, 5v5 games are more consistent result-wise without having two tanks.
Games as in like games in Overwatch or IP outside?
In
Overwatch. So we're talking about the fact that the two tank synergy is a bit more swingy versus the one tank counter swapping. There's a load of things to discuss there. I think it's a bit of a wash, to be honest. I do think the I've talked quite a bit about how the fact that you would lose if you had the wrong 2 tanks is overblown, but then again, the counter swapping's overblown. So, question mark.
Overwatch.
So not like Call of Duty when it's 5v5.
No, I don't know enough about that, but I do see this argument. I think it's like, oh, if I have, Ryan Diva and they have Zarya Hog, I just auto lose. I don't think that's true. That was never true in my rank experience, even in like the low to mid ranks. I think people don't really optimize the crap out of those tank synergies. You just kind of exist. But the main, right, exactly. The main point here is actually a statistical point. This is something I realized like almost before the 5v5 debate became a big thing, and I realized that 5v5 games. One of the bad things.
Yeah, the bigger swingy things that could happen in the game were mitigated by the tanks for the most part, Flute. Yeah, you're right.
Is that you do have more...
Because there were more denial abilities in the game and more bodies in the game for the most part.
Ownership. Yeah. Because that also means that you have more opportunity to toss the fight. And the other thing too as well is it's like if you flip a coin 5 times in a row, right? What are the odds that you're going to get a pretty, a 2-3 split or a 3-2 split of head tails? And then I'll increase that to 6, and now I'll increase that to 7, now 8, and 10. And the more you flip the coin, the more you're gonna get that 50-50. It's relatively even. The problem with 5v5 is things just tend to snowball in one direction too quickly.
It only happened when people ran the few tank combos that really made terrible, like Hog Monkey into a good tank combination. And even then, I think quite a lot of that was the psychology of I don't want to switch to a thing that's commonly considered good. I think at any rank below, let's say Diamond, the fact that you were playing into a good combination didn't matter at all, apart from the fact that it was a signpost that people weren't working together. Because anything below that, it just matters how you actually play. It's so ridiculously easy to carry in those ranks that realistically the variation in play, like ability between the different characters, it just vastly exceeds that. But as I said, like, this is the same argument that we're making in counter swapping. Counter swapping is exactly the same. Like, outplaying the other character is a thing, like, in terms of tank counter swapping specifically, is more of a thing that you can do. You can still exist and get value when you're being counter swapped. You can have a positive win rate while being counter swapped. But what you can't do when you're counter swapped, that you can do in the 6v6, is you can have a good time. You can enjoy yourself. The point is the enemy team's going to counter swap you in 5v5 and you're going to fucking hate the game and you're going to win and you'll still hate yourself. That's the problem.
And I think that like that is objectively true. People always like, oh, 5v5, like I read this all the time. My games were terrible. They read the tough stomps or losses.
They blame the matchmaker. It's not the matchmaker.
They blame the matchmaker.
I've said this the whole time. It's not the matchmaker.
It's human. It's human psychology. It's too quick to, and even the fact that there's not another ult to kind of like even things out now, right? Like it's just unavoidable is what it is. It's really unavoidable. So even things like the counterpicking feels more important now, even if it's not. So it's like that.
I think it is. I think in the tank.
No, and I agree with that. I would agree with that, but it certainly feels like, regardless, that's going to be something.
It's harder to overcome with your own skill set, particularly on tank. And I know this because, do you want to finish your point before I go in on this?
No, that's.
I think the point is, it doesn't matter if you overcome the disadvantage you get from being counter swapped, because people don't play the game to win the game. They play the game to enjoy the video game. And if you can't enjoy the video game, then it doesn't matter if you win.
Okay.
It's even harder if you get a bit of joy off of winning.
So, first of all, everybody's been blaming the matchmaker. It is not the matchmaker. I never thought it's the matchmaker. And I always said I think it's just the format causing this. Because especially if there's a mismatch on the tank roll where that tank is more powerful. When it happens, because that could happen about the same amount of time, but when it happens, it's more prevalent now. I'm not sure if it's happening more or it's because it's more prevalent. Maybe it's both. I'm not sure. I'd have to really think about that a lot more. But one thing that I noticed doing my Orisa on Ranked GM was when I picked Orisa and they would go Zarya, even in Diamond, and like, let's be real, like I could farm a kids in Diamond. Like it's not hard. The game became so much more difficult, and I could not directly outplay my counterpart because of the more health, because he has double bubbles. I was way more reliant on my supports, and like my player agency, my ability, my player skill did not matter nearly as much. I would say that picking the right character in Overwatch 1, at least in ranked and players that you were better than, I would say picking the right character was like maybe 30-40% of like what you could do, but like 60-70% of like you still could outskill it, right? It was that much more.
Right.
I would say those numbers feel flipped on tank in this game, where like I was like, guys, like, and this was Orisa meta too. I can't fucking kill this guy. Like he should, like, and I could point out the exact points where he should have died here. He should have died here. He missed his bubble here. But because the stats were raised, and this is what I really want to question you on. Because the stats were raised so much on top of the abilities being a lot better, like there was less opportunity for me to pierce and punish a mistake.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe, and let's talk about potential solutions to fix 5v5, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this first, if you're down to transition to it.
Yeah, works for me. Let's do it.
Do you think that maybe the tanks having more health was something that we gaslit ourselves into, and they don't actually need those kind of stats? Because if they don't have the stats, sure, they're more weak to DPS. Support abilities are stronger, though. They now have less headshot and crit, which I think is a bad change. I don't like that. But if the health pools were lower like they were in 6v6, does that help bring back the direct impact that tanks have because they can actually kill each other, or does that make you just feel like shit because you explode even farther?
Your pressure cycle is so much lower that you're just going to explode. You need those extra resources. You need to have the idea of those extra resources potentially going into you to prevent people just hating on you, because of the fact you need a amount of resources in your kit, and then you need a timed invulnerability in your kit. If you don't have that timed invulnerability, then people will just dump resources into you until you can't do anything. If you do have that timed invulnerability, then they can dump into you and you still get a period of invulnerability at the end, which still makes it so there's a clear cutoff point where you have to start pressuring, which is the interesting tank trade, and you just don't have that.
Well, ever tested with less stats is my question.
I don't know that. The thing that you have to balance is you have to, like, the funny thing is a lot of the solutions to, like, tank are, like, making the one tank less actually impactful in the battlefield, but make it feel more impactful. So, like, right now, like, tank is very impactful, but it doesn't feel very impactful because the impact it has is through basically baiting attention and just absorbing stuff, right? So what you're saying is that, like, if we reduce the health pools, then that gives us the excuse to be able to allow tanks to do more things. The problem is that, like, if you reduce, like, let's just say we just took Orisa, reduced her by 100 HP, it would feel just like Orisa, but worse, unless you gave Orisa something else to do, too.
Yeah.
Like, if you gave, I'm a helicopter Orisa, you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to give, okay, you gotta let me cook, but, like, you have to give them the option to do something else, otherwise they're just.
And this is why I took the side of 6v6. I realized no matter how you change this, you can't bring back the gameplay loop of direct options where there were 2 tanks on each team, like, exchanging, and that's how a lot of tanks are able to get value.
So my 2 solutions have been, whether they're better to 6v6, I think no, but they're certainly more directly accessible to where we're at right now. One suggestion I had, I actually talked with, I can't remember who it was about this, was hitbox sizes, where it's like, it's the psychology of the bigger the target, the more attractive the target is. Is that something that they said that they hadn't really toyed with it as much, but I do think if you look at, like, characters like Junker Queen, right? Junker Queen has indirect mitigation through just because she's hard to shoot.
Yeah, she does. And
she's just hard
very
to
noticeable in the Mauga duel, by the way. Mauga and
it really
very
was
noticeable. Very noticeable.
It really was. And I think it was
100%.
Was it
agreed
worse or better back in the day? They did something with their hitbox not too long ago.
I think they nerfed it. I think they nerfed it. Or no, I think they buffed it. I think they made it small.
You can definitely balance through hitboxes. They just never have.
They buffed it by making her smaller, I think, maybe?
I don't remember. Somebody in chat laughed correctly. But yeah, long story short.
It still doesn't change the idea that it changes the psychology around shooting them 100%. It might make them feel better, but it doesn't change the idea that shooting them actually is good because you don't have that extra extension on resources. I just don't think it's I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's escapable.
If you're still here, there's a good chance you're interested in 6v6. I run 6v6 Pugs every single Sunday, 4 till 8 PM BST. We are currently doing a project where we rework one hero per week. We've recently done Roadhog, Lightweaver, and now Bastion. And the vote on my Discord is now up for next week. All you have to do is turn up in my Discord in the waiting room at the time, and we'll chill out and play some games together.